It is August 25th, 2020, 6:32 p.m. Has this meeting been publicly noticed?
It has, yes.
And it looks like all commissioners are present, except at this point, Commissioner
Blankenship is not present and Commissioner Patel is not present.
Okay, so 2 commissioners. The first item up on our agenda is the approval
Allison?
Yes.
Is it Rozek?
Yes.
I just have a question. I think this is my 3rd meeting, and I'm just not familiar with Ms. Blankenship. Does anyone know of personal or professional other reasons that she doesn't participate or has not in the last 3 meetings? This, I think, is the 3rd one.
I believe her term came up, I want to say in April. I know she kind of expressed she was not planning to continue, but like we mentioned, because she hasn't really been officially replaced, we still are sending her the agenda, but I'm pretty sure she's just not planning to participate anymore.
Okay.
So
good to know.
Just for the plan commissioner's knowledge, we're not replaced. I don't believe we are sending a replacement. The statute, Bart, if you just want to say the statute, basically says we're supposed to have 7 plan commissioners, or
right. State statute defines 7 plan commissioners. We have always had 9. Attorney Bayer has indicated that it has not been a problem to this date. However, we would be well within our bounds to go down to the 7 that are required by state statute, which is a little more administratively doable for staff, and then also it helps in terms of getting quorums if we don't have people attending such a situation. So I know the village board was set to contemplate going down from 9 to 7 at some point in the near future. I'm not sure where Clerk Bruckman is with that. I know that she had been talking with President Rozek and the chair of JP&L on doing that. So to Crystal's point, in the meantime, we have been sending both Tim, because Tim's term expired as well, and Leah invitations to the meeting, because we do need their help in getting quorum sometimes.
Sure.
So.
Okay, all good to know. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So the first item on our agenda is the approval of the June 23rd, 2020 meeting minutes. Do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion. Second.
Was that Dan?
Yep.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Dan, seconded by Commissioner Eric. Any changes or discussion?
I only have one teeny change on page 6 of the minutes.
Go ahead.
The 3rd paragraph from the top, where it said I agreed with Mr. Kudo. Anyway, that last sentence I would replace "but agreed that finding a way" should instead read "but agreed with finding a way." So just replace that with with. That's it.
Okay, anybody object to that? Seeing none, are there any other changes? If not, we have a motion to approve and a second. All those in favor say aye with the change suggested by Commissioner Kylie Miller. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 0. Okay. The next item on our agenda is to discuss and recommend an application to discontinue a portion of the unimproved right-of-way on the west side of North Kramer Street at the southwest intersection of North Kramer Street and East Menlo Boulevard. Bart?
Yeah, thanks, President Rozek. I'm going to share some slides on this just because it's not the most common thing that the Plan Commission's been asked to do in the past. Maybe some commissioners with longer experience have reviewed some of these, but this is the first one I've done here in Shorewood, at least. We had done them in West Allis when I was there, so I'm familiar with it. Just need to get my slides ready. And I believe the applicant is on the line. Is that correct? Or possibly not. I know that we had invited him, so if there's any questions for the applicant, we can try later to see if he's joined us or not. So advancing. So yeah, what we have before us tonight is an application for a discontinuance of portion of right-of-way at the intersection of Menlo and Kramer. As we can see in the slide here, what is presumed to be the side yard for this property is quite large. And so the applicant would like to utilize that for their property. They had applied with the village board last year for a special privilege. Within that conversation, the board had directed the homeowner to actually apply for a discontinuance so that they would actually own the portion of right-of-way they sought to build a retaining wall and fence on. And so they subsequently have done that. The reason for that large portion of right-of-way, as you can see in the top, the original platting of the lots along Menlo included lots fully abutting Menlo. Kramer did not come through at the time, so this little notation here in the middle, just above the 4, those 2 lots were actually vacated or discontinued a while ago to allow for Kramer Street to come through. However, they didn't readjust the actual lot lines for the side properties, and so there's excess right-of-way on both the east and west portions of Kramer Street. So what we have here is the application. It would show that the 14 feet of that lot would be discontinued as right-of-way, which would still allow for the 4-foot setback from the sidewalk. So this would be much more in line and normalized with the remainder of the village in terms of how we've platted our lots. And so they've applied to do that. It's pretty straightforward. DPW has no objections to it. There's no utilities or necessary function for that piece of right-of-way. It's just kind of a remnant of what existed. There's a process outlined by state statutes as to how this goes forward. So the applicant did have to submit a petition of 1/3 of the properties on the street, which he did, and we received back in June. We introduced it to the village board in July, at which point they set a public hearing for September 8th. A third-class notice was published in the newspaper for anyone to comment during the public hearing. The village attorney filed a list pendants with the Register of Deeds about the potential discontinuance. We're here at the stage of Plan Commission recommendation. And then the village board would formally consider the discontinuance resolution on September 8th, at which point it would be recorded with the Register of Deeds. And assuming it passes, that would then change the property lines as requested. So with that, the Plan Commission is asked essentially to provide any comments or recommendation to the village board for their consideration on September 8th. As I mentioned, staff has no issues with it. DPW did confirm there's no need for that right-of-way. So we are recommending approval as applied for.
Okay, is there anything that the petitioner would like to say?
Is Todd Hutchinson on the call or not? I thought I saw one extra person, but maybe that's just a member of the public. Oops. He must not be on the call.
Okay. Does any of the commissioners have any questions for Bart?
Is there a purchase then of this portion of land, or is it just sort of given over and then it gets taxed at like their property tax goes up because they have additional area?
Correct. So it's right of way. So it's not actually village owned property. It's land that's been dedicated for public purpose. Mm-hmm. So when the village determines that there is no longer a public purpose for it, it actually reverts to that property owner. So it's not a purchase necessarily. It's more of a reversion after we acknowledge that we don't have a public need for it. So yes, then their land, their assessed value in theory would go up based on the increased land coverage that they would own.
Okay, thank you.
Looking at the property directly south of it, the 3563 Kramer, it looks like they're in a very similar position. Have they contacted them? I mean, I have no problems with this discontinuance, but have the other neighbors contacted the village at all?
Correct. The neighbor to the south, nor the neighbor across the street, they've got a little extra right of way you can see as well when you compare it to the lot line there. Neither of those neighbors have approached us. The reason this one did come to us is because this particular property owner wanted to install that retaining wall and fence. And so that kind of triggered the conversation. The village doesn't have a way to trigger that conversation with these other property owners unless they choose to apply for it. So they have not to this point.
Okay, and it looks like there's a $500 permit fee that I saw.
Yep, there was a zoning petition that was filed in order to do this.
Okay.
Why was it a zoning petition?
That's the only application that we have in our office. It's awkwardly named. I will give you that, but that's what it's referenced as.
So it's not, we don't have like a discontinuance of a right of way?
Yeah, we don't have, we just have one kind of generic application for any, whether it's a CSM or a discontinuance or a zoning change or things like that. So it's all, that's how it has been administered. I'd be very happy to change that, quite honestly, because it does get awkward in explaining that to the applicants.
Do you need our permission as Plan Commission or to change those titles?
It would need to be changed in the village fee schedule because that's where the fee is referenced. But that is something that can easily be done. I don't think there'd be objection to that.
Okay, can you just remind us during budget or whenever fee schedule comes up?
Will do.
Okay, thank you. Does it,
I have a question. So if we approve this, is it going to be the change applicable just to the petitioner, or are those other two lots going to also be changed as well?
Just this lot here that you see in the screen. So they had to submit this engineer drawing. So this would be what we would submit to the Register of Deeds to formally change that. The one to the south or the one to the east would not change, correct?
Not a package deal. And
Nope.
I mean, I assume that when we bought that property, there was nothing to indicate that, you know, this is like village right of way. I mean, it just looks like it's part of the yard. It wasn't ever used for any other village purpose, you know. So I don't really see a problem with making the change.
Can I make a motion?
Sure.
I recommend that the village board approve the application to discontinue a portion of the unimproved right-of-way on the west side of North Kramer Street at the southwest intersection of North Kramer Street and East Menlo Boulevard.
Second.
so we have a motion by Commissioner Dan and a second by Commissioner Kudo. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I,
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you. We'll go to the next agenda item as soon as I can pull it up. Hold on. Crystal, can you just go ahead and name the next agenda item while I pull it up?
Oh, sure. It's item number 4 is review of draft housing chapter for the comprehensive plan update.
Great. Bart?
Thanks, President Rosick. I'll provide a brief update, kind of an overview. This will kind of guide items 4, 5, and 6. They're all just chapters of the comprehensive plan. So as a reminder, we did host a virtual open house and an online survey. It's starting July 21st, 2020. Several plan commissioners were there. And then subsequently that week, we also held stakeholder focus groups. There was 4 sets of those with approximately 10 to 12 people within each based on categories. So myself and Vandewall, our consultant, Jackie Mitch, she helped coordinate those. So we got some base feedback that's going to be incorporated within these chapters and other chapters throughout the process. The schedule that we have defined was that the village-led chapters would come first because in theory, they're more of just kind of data updates and they're less nuanced in theory, although I'd like to believe that's actually true because it was quite a bit of work to just to update these, quite honestly. So the concept was to update the 5 village-led chapters in August and September, and then Vandewall would also present their chapters in September as well. They're doing issues and opportunities, land use, and intergovernmental cooperation, which we determined to be the bigger tasks within this effort. So what we have before us tonight is housing, transportation, and economic development. We'll go through that tonight. I'm looking forward to your feedback and your comments, and then hopefully we can also go through the end of it in which the goals, objectives, and recommendations still kind of remain undetermined because I'd like to get additional feedback on those. Then we will have a large public engagement meeting in October where we'll present the full draft to the public. Based on that feedback, we'll come back to the Plan Commission with what's hoped to be a final draft in November. At that point, then we could publish a public hearing to adopt the comprehensive plan update in January. We 30 days in between the publication of that notice and of the hearing of that. So if we can continue the schedule, which is quite honestly ambitious because as I mentioned, it was a bigger task than I anticipated in August, we will still be on schedule for January 2021 completion. So with that, I'll go through briefly the housing update. I'm hoping that you all had a chance to read it, so I don't want to go through line by line or table by table of what's all in there. So I'm just going to go through kind of an outline of what I've included. Section 2.1 in the housing chapter is an introduction. I hope that's pretty straightforward. Section 2.2 is the vision statement as it currently exists within the village's vision statement. So every 10 years we have updated that historically, is my understanding. So in the 2010 comprehensive plan, it referenced the 2015 vision statement. Similarly, we're hoping to reference the 2025 vision statement. As I understand it, that will potentially be updated within the next 5 years as well. So it's kind of, it is what it is right now, but if there's any comments on it, obviously we can take those into consideration. So in respect to housing, it claims that Shorewood will be a vibrant urban community with safe, friendly neighborhoods offering desirable housing options that attract diverse people of all ages and stages of life. So once again, that's where we're at with the currently adopted vision statement for the village. So if there's comments, we can take those later.
Oh,
Sure.
about that. Is the vision statement the same thing as what I was talking about, the mission statement? Is there a mission statement as well?
I don't know. The vision statement I know is it's quite lengthy and there was an implementation plan with it. I'm not familiar with a different mission statement.
Because usually there's a mission statement and then the vision statement. Okay, can you just double check that?
I will, yes, I will ask Tyler or Rebecca if they have any
Okay, thank you.
one particularly.
I also have a question, Bart, please.
Sure.
So where we go to stakeholder input 2.2.1, this is all based upon the housing study. Is that correct? So there's nothing here. You had all these groups, right? We've had our stakeholder groups. Is that new information from our stakeholder groups already in here?
Yes, but not specifically. So as I mentioned, we did have a focus group of residential issues. I believe it was the fourth one on the July 23rd date. So Jackie has summarized those notes. I haven't published them quite yet because I haven't had a chance to look through them. Like I mentioned, it's been more of a task than I thought. So those will definitely be incorporated. The ones that are within the draft chapter that you're seeing here, and I emphasize draft because we have plenty of opportunity to add or change things. Those are specific to the CDA, their housing study that they did earlier this year. So the ones that are here are definitely from that plan, but Jackie also has summarized the fourth focus group, which related to neighborhood and housing issues. We will add that once I have the chance to put it in there.
Okay, so when I'm looking, will I get another draft then that will have the new stuff in different type or something so I know what's—
Yes, yeah, my intention. Yeah, the intention is to add new stuff in red with perhaps notes or things like that. So it hopefully won't be a lot of new things because like I said, most of this should be in here, but just in terms of timing wise, there were a few things. The census website wasn't working one day, so I couldn't get some data, but yes, the further drafts will have an explanation of what is new.
Okay, and so I just want to make sure that if the people took the time to participate in those focus groups, that their input is diligently noted, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
If we have comments, like say, as we go through this, do you want us to hold those or tell you when we're on that page?
I'll defer to President Bozak on how she'd like to entertain those.
I think we could just say it while we're on the page. And unfortunately, with just so you guys know, with the PowerPoint, I can't see everyone. So go ahead and just say, you know, I have a question, or I just can't see if you raise your hand or something like that. It's on the sidebar. So anyhow, I think it'd be better if we just, as we go through, if we have questions or comments, we go ahead and say them.
Okay, President Rozak, this is Barb. So in that stakeholder input section, there were just a couple of statements that I thought we should look at. In that second last paragraph, it mentions that older housing stock does not offer move-in ready supply. And I thought maybe we should put does not always offer move-in ready supply, because a lot of people do renovate their homes, older homes. And so when they go to sell them, they do have, you know, updated kitchens and bathrooms, and, you know, they're in move-in ready condition. So I want to make sure we're not just making blanket statements that may not apply to every property. And then in that last sentence in that same paragraph, it says a fear of density impacts support for redevelopment projects. And I thought that word fear sounded a little prejudicial. I mean, everybody has different preferences for you know, how much more density Shorewood needs, considering we're the most dense community in the state. So I thought maybe something, you know, like a dislike of more density or preference for, you know, people want to maintain that village, you know, atmosphere, but I don't think that comes from a place of fear. So
can I go on that? The housing, did that come from the housing study? Because specifically I asked that question to the housing consultant in the forum, and she said it was not a fear of density. It actually was a fear of height. So she made that clarification in that question and answer when the study was done. And it was a huge clarification. So I don't know, I understand what Commissioner Kylie Miller is saying, and I agree with her. The fear might be a bad word, but you know, not the best word. But I also don't agree with the word density. I think the concern that many residents had, and the consultant agreed, that she never heard the word density. She only heard the word height.
right.
So,
And I think we've talked about that zoning commission. We were talking about our priorities a few months back, that we didn't want to, you know, exceed the zoning limits for building heights as we have in the past. So that might, you know, be where people have a preference to stick with the zoning.
I can find a way to make that update a little more clear. As you'll probably note, this is literally copied and pasted from that recommendation section of the input. So I might need to change it if we're not, you know, using it word for word, just because that's what was adopted in the previous plan. But I'm happy to perhaps summarize differently to the point where we can document what the Plan Commission feels and President Rosick's participation in that plan also acknowledged. So I can definitely look at both of those sentences and find a way to, I don't know, clarify or soften the language, if that's the accurate word.
Oh, so you're saying it came directly from a resident?
No, so this is what they had documented, so it's why it's indented, because it's word for word from what's within that plan. Because once again, the goal of the update, quote unquote, was just to incorporate previous efforts. So
I agree. I just remember questioning that after it was written, and the response from the consultant was, no, you're correct. It was a concern for height. We never heard the word density. So I don't know if it was already written, so I don't know how to fix that, but.
yeah, or maybe it was fixed in a different location. I don't know, but I can definitely rework this sentence, or this area, to perhaps not be verbatim from the plan, if that's desired. It sounds like, just to clarify where I think the village is coming from. This is a definitely new plan, so.
President Rosick?
Yes.
This is Trustee Stokerbrand. I think if it is from the, you know, whatever the final document from the housing study said, you know, we clearly have to leave it as it is. And then if we want to make a separate statement after that, I think that would be the best thing to do in terms of accuracy and fidelity to the source. Question I had, though, also in the same vein, was where they talked about a balance of, it's on page 21. And this is probably the way, as Bart said, it's verbatim, but it's not clear what it means. And if we wanted to add a sentence, or someone can explain this to me, housing issues / concerns, balance of single family and rental needs. So is that single family owners versus rental needs? Or I guess I would look for clarity on that, unless someone else can help me with that right now. Maybe I'm just reading it and not understanding it.
Yeah, I think you've pretty much got it. So as going through that study, I'm pretty confident that it's trying to document that there were one perspective of a homeowner versus one perspective of a renter, and you know which policies win out. Sometimes we are a split community, so policies that favor homeowners, you know, sometimes don't favor renters, and vice versa. So it's just trying to document that it is an issue that we face here in Shorewood, whether that's, you know, parking, you know, as we're currently debating at the board level, or other kind of policies that impact homeowners. It's a split between what a single family homeowner feels Shorewood needs and what a renter, you know, feels Shorewood needs. So that's where that's coming from.
Then I guess I would take editorial license and insert the word owner, if that's truly what we think. Just because it makes it more clear. Otherwise it was confusing. Thank you.
Sure.
And I do agree with Kathy. Go ahead and leave the sentence of whatever it was, but if you can, just in italics, say it was clarified during the follow-up of the final draft, what the consultant said about height. That might make sense. Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, this is Barb again. Going back to that previous page, the same paragraph, what do we mean about co-housing? And I'm just wondering, do we mean condo duplexes? Because then we also say that loan terms for the purchase of duplex housing are difficult, and there's duplexes all over Shorewood. I don't think it's difficult to get a loan to buy a duplex. So I wasn't sure if we meant, you know, the ones that are legal structures as condominiums or condominiums, or what do you mean by co-housing?
Yeah, co-housing is a term that relates to multiple families living in one housing unit. So sometimes that could be, you know, empty nesters, you know, 2 or 3 couples of empty nesters living in a large house. The zoning code currently does not allow that because we only allow 1 family per house or number of unrelated people. Because we're close to the university, it's hard for us to modify that definition without, quote unquote, inviting, you know, large student populations to take advantage of that. So co-housing has been an issue, particularly with the senior community within our housing meetings. So finding a way to work co-housing into Shorewood, I think, has been, you know, discussed or debated. So that's what that refers to. With respect to the purchase of the duplex housing, I recall that being, there's different standards for down payments for duplexes. And so what ends up happening more so is that non-owner occupants who do this for a living, quote unquote, are more able to purchase a duplex than, say, someone who wants to purchase and live in it, just because the barriers to entrance into that duplex unit are more than a single family house. And so it came up as, we have a lot of duplexes. We would like to see owner occupants of those duplexes, but sometimes the financing of that is less conducive. And so what happens is you have someone who owns, like, you know, say 10 or 12 of them, they can easily purchase an additional one as opposed to someone else trying to live in it. So that's where that came up. That was discussed.
Question on that part. What if that's just not accurate though?
Yeah, I don't think it's,
Because I mean, I know for a fact, if you're an investor, you have to put 20 to 30% down. And if you're a first-time home buyer, you still qualify for the FHA, VA, go down the list, even on a duplex.
We can definitely talk about it. I know CDA members who are part of the real estate industry had confirmed their understanding of that. So the CDA will be reviewing this at their September meeting. So I'm definitely happy to bring that to them to clarify what that means. And once again, we don't have to take it verbatim from the plan. That's just where this is coming from. But I can definitely, and anyone here as well, if you have further follow-up on that you'd like to provide to help clarify that, I don't need to put it verbatim. I did. But if we have reason to believe that it's not accurate, it makes no sense to keep it in here.
No, I mean, I know it's not accurate. It doesn't matter, I guess. I mean, we can pull it in or out. But I mean, you know, my brother just brought a duplex in Shorewood, and I won't say how many you put down, but it's the same as a single family house.
yeah, I agree with Dave. My niece just bought a duplex with her fiance in Bayview, and I think they put 3% down. So I think where that has come up before in CDA meetings is when we were talking about programs to assist owners with taking a duplex and turning it into 2 condominiums. And at that time, then President Johnson had said that it was difficult to get loans for those kind of purchases. So maybe there's some confusion as to, you know, what structure, if you're buying the whole duplex versus just 1 unit.
Yep, I'm happy to clarify that with the person it came from. It was a CDA member, so I can reach out to him just to confirm what I'm missing perhaps on that, but it was a real estate broker who's on our CDA. So
Okay.
Great point to clarify.
Yeah, maybe in our document, we just provide an asterisk and a paragraph of explanation from our point of view.
Sure.
Okay, moving on.
So yeah, if there's nothing further with section 2.2 on the vision, within 2.3, I did provide a historical context and framework for housing. Just as some backdrop of this, I understand Vanderwall as the consultant is working on issues and opportunities. Within a lot of the conversations that we had, equity and diversity did come up. They are drafting that as one of our issues and opportunities within that section. So based on that, I thought it was worth providing perhaps some national or regional housing context of, how suburbs, in particular Shorewood, developed. So I did provide some context of, how our land use came to be and how our population perhaps came to be demographically, and how that, has been shaped within the Milwaukee metro region as a whole, not just specific to Shorewood. And then I did also provide just a framework of what housing is in the village in terms of how the CDA, Design Review Board, Board of Appeals, Plan Commission, and Planning and Development Department administer the policies set by the board, and so forth. So if there's any questions on 2.3, I'd be happy to.
I actually had a few. It felt awkward with the redlining where it was at. It was very prominent, and then it just dropped off. It wasn't like, my browser keeps closing on my phone, so I have to keep opening it. But it just felt out of place, like very prominent, with not a lot of explanation, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Here, I'm trying to get to it. It says, I get the whole 65,000 in case of however, the same deed restriction, blah, 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 housing segregation and redlining. And then there's a map, but then it didn't talk about, has that been reversed, or has there just it just dropped off there, and it starts talking about the different agencies. So, if we've done anything since the redlining, right?
I mean, yeah, point well taken. This is why it's difficult to review draft chapters without context of other ones. So that's why I kind of indicated the issues and opportunities section will talk about the demographics of Shorewood and inclusivity and things like that. To my knowledge, the village has not proactively done anything to reverse housing segregation. I don't think that's common for suburban communities.
We did adopt, unfortunately, I want to review our policies. That's when I was doing the purchasing procedure. I recognized that nothing says equal opportunity or anything about providing equal opportunity in most of our policies, but there is a federal housing. We did copy the Federal Housing Act for housing to stop redlining. That is in our policy book. It stinks. It's like a paragraph long, and I've always wanted to update that to make it more robust and more meaningful. But we could just at least quote that.
Absolutely, yep.
So that we know we don't end with we redlined and that's where we're at.
Yeah, and to be clear, I always make the subject of the sentence clear. It's not that Shorewood did that necessarily. It's not that other communities did that. That was a financing mechanism. It's very unfortunate, obviously. So I did have some comments within the public engagement of, when did Shorewood do that kind of things? And it's not that Shorewood did it. It's just that it nationally, regionally, it did happen. And so anything that we have done as a community since then, I'd be happy to document if that's in a policy book somewhere that we've, made a statement against it or something of that nature. So I will definitely look for that. If I can't find it, I'll reach back out to you specifically to locate that.
It's in our policy book, and it's the Fair Housing Act, and it's copied directly from the feds. That was my first comment, and then I have one more, which is, so when we talk about the different agencies that affect housing, because we're talking about inclusion and diversity and respect, and do we want to include the HRC? Now, they don't specifically deal with housing, but I have a feeling that they may dive into that.
I'm open to conversation on that. I'm assuming that the HRC will be mentioned in the issues and opportunities section. As I mentioned, I know they're talking about committee structures and appointments to committees and things like that. If there's nothing specific to housing in their mission or whatever, I don't know how to incorporate it, but I'm open to conversation on that. This is, unfortunately a very chopped review, and that's why the October review will be much more comprehensive. But I'm open to, if people have other thoughts on including that, I'm open to conversation.
Can you just, they do have a vision statement or a framework. I helped write it and at the very beginning, and I do believe it mentions, it doesn't specifically say housing, but in all aspects of the village. So it may make sense only if we're going to be talking about housing being inclusive and diverse, and it just would make sense. And then the other question is the village board. I don't know that we have to list them, but they deal with housing too. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think I introduced the topic with that. I say the village board sets Shorewood's local housing policies. These policies are administered and enforced through various boards, committees, and departments. So I did kind of shortchange the importance of that, I suppose, but I just listed the ones that are specifically charged with it. But I do have the sentence that says the village board sets the policies, and these are the groups that administer them. I can beef that up to make it clear. You know, I think that's going to carry through all the chapters where the village board is the policymaker. Whether that's economic development, housing, transportation, but.
That's fine. And then what about border review?
Excuse me, sorry?
What about border review?
Yes, I do not have them on here. That's a good point. I can add border review because they do review assessments.
Okay, that's all I had for that. Any
The
other?
way, I'm sorry. The way that Bart has this worded about, you know, which groups are responsible for either administering or enforcing housing policies, I think the ones that he has listed are really, it's really all that we need to include. Although the HRC may be concerned about equitable housing in the village, they don't really have responsibility or authority to, you know, to make any changes. So I think the ones that we have listed are just those that have, you know, the authority to really make changes or have something to say about housing and zoning.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Eric. I would tend to agree with Commissioner Kelly. I mean, at some point, many committees or boards would have something to do with housing. This seems to be more of an official role as opposed to suggestions or requests or things along those lines.
Okay.
I would agree. I think that until and unless the HRC comes up with something more concrete, I would tend to leave it out.
Okay, sounds good.
I had one last question in that section of when we were talking about the covenants that early Shorewood subdivisions had. I was kind of shocked to read about those racial restrictions in the Armory subdivision. And I was wondering, where was that subdivision? And was this true of all of Shorewood? I mean, and then we just list that one as an example, because that was kind of surprising. I knew it was true in Wauwatosa and the Washington Highlands, but I didn't know that about Shorewood.
Correct. The reason I think that people know of Wauwatosa so well is that was the focus of a study that was done in the late 70s and has been published numerous times since, where they reviewed all the subdivisions in Wauwatosa, and I don't know the percentage, but a large percentage of them did have those kind of covenants. Within Shorewood, there's 2 that I've been able to find. There's 53, I believe, subdivisions, and so many of the ones that were platted prior to, say, the teens and 20s when this village before the village incorporated, it's hard to find documentation on that. If the ones in the 20s that are more accessible, I've only been able to find 2. The author of that study actually does live in Shorewood, and I contacted her, and she's trying to give me some, help and background researching that. But to this point, only 2 have been identified, so that's 2 of 53. But it's not in all of them, but it probably is in some more. The Armory subdivision, my understanding, if I get it correctly, is the northwest corner of Oakland and Capitol. So like the Cat's Corner building and up like a couple blocks in there. So perhaps to Bartlett, I can send you a map of where that includes, but it's generally in that specific area. It's like 2 or 3 blocks that was platted for that. The Armory, I know the Light Horse has reference to that on their historical markers.
Thank you.
Anybody else? If not, go ahead, Bart. We can move to the next section.
Sure. So then 2.4 is more of the data within the plan itself. So this is some updated data from the previous plan. So facts and trends. I'm just going to give a broad overview, and then you guys can, have any questions that you might have. So I list the owner occupancy 46 to renter occupancy 53.4. I provide some regional context of that just because we oftentimes compare ourselves to our North Shore neighbors, which the more north you go, the more suburban they are. And so that rate falls off quickly. It's starting in Whitefish Bay. So it actually is more in line with the inner ring suburbs that we, developed alongside with as streetcar suburbs. So there is some regional context of why that exists, perhaps. It's not just UWM. I also give a unit type. So we are 37.5 single family houses, 33.8 within multifamily, and then 18.5 in duplex. Our housing study did indicate that our duplex numbers were pretty unique for most communities. So that's something that, is unique to Shorewood that we probably should discuss or understand better. The age of our housing stock, obviously not surprisingly, is largely before World War II. The cost of owner-occupied housing has increased since 2010 by approximately 11.7 or 11.1%. The median house price for owner-occupied house is $334,700. Renter-occupied unit, the median rent is $976, which also has increased 21% since 2010. Housing costs across the board in our competitive, markets are increasing. We're a little bit higher than the average per se. So cost has come up as an issue. And then cost burden, owner-occupied cost burden, 24.17 of households with mortgages are cost burden in that they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. And then renter occupancy, 39.2, also cost burden. So those are the general facts within here. I did intend on also including, our previous plan had age of occupancy because it was identified that we are not a starter community, perhaps, where first-time home buyers can have an easy market entrance. But once again, the census website wasn't working when I tried to get this last week, so I will add that to the list so that we can identify whether or not there's any policies that we need to set based on our understanding of owner of mortgages for first-time home buyers. So,
Bart, if you mentioned, I'm going to mention duplexes again, not that I don't know about anything else, but one interesting thing about all these numbers you put out, and then when we were talking about the financing available, just in your numbers there, it looks like about half our duplexes are owner occupied. Doing the math, 46% of our houses are owner occupied, 37% are single family, right? So, 9% of the duplexes, because I assume a lot of people don't live in multifamily and own them. That seems like a high number and a good thing. And I think over time, when you look at your renter occupied cost, 976, the reason why, I don't think when they say there's investors coming in and have better terms, investors aren't buying our duplexes because they're too expensive. They're not a good investment. We have low rent and high taxes, for the cost of our houses. So it'd be interesting to dive into those numbers more because I think over time, we're going to get more owner occupied duplexes because for younger people, that is an option. Right, because they can't afford to float it themselves, but if they have a renter upstairs or downstairs, that's a really big advantage we have for people.
Yeah, I can see if I can find specific data on owner-occupied duplexes, 2010 versus 2018, and see if there's a trend there worth noting. That also was identified in the housing study that, and I'm blanking on what you said there, but they agreed with what you just said in terms of.
Yeah, an investor doesn't want to buy a $300,000 duplex and charge someone $976 in rent.
Yes, thank you. That was the point. Yes, that was the exact point the CDA made in terms of what rent they could get for those units.
And
so just as someone who's kind of new to this, is a takeaway from this that it's better to try to keep the duplexes as duplexes and get them owner occupied versus what we tried to do with the neighborhood loan program for duplexes, switching them to one single family. Is the takeaway from all of this that we should do owner occupied duplexes?
that question.
In a way, would there be programs that would support that? Is that what I'm looking for? Is that the point?
That question was asked exactly to the consultant when they presented the study, and they're correct me if I'm wrong, Bart, but they said correct that we should stop trying to convert our duplexes. They're our entry market into our housing.
Yep, and they're affordable in terms of who can live in them. So the policymakers, that yourselves, the village board, whoever adopts this plan, obviously will set that policy. But the study definitely said that duplexes were unique, something that we should preserve. And if there's a program that we can do to help preserve that, this would be the place to perhaps plant that seed to identify it. As you're likely aware, the CDA has a neighborhood program that's currently frozen. It used to offer duplex conversions. We've frozen that, I think, because the policymakers realized it was counterintuitive. So when that gets reestablished, I think, finding a way to incentivize owner-occupied duplexes could be a potential program.
Yeah, and I think that it's also probably from that comment from even that broker, Bart, that you had in there, it's education, right? It's letting people know that it is an option for them to put 5% down on a duplex and come in and be part of our community, which is a big deal for some people, because we're not going to get young people into our community unless they're, because houses are expensive here.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if incentivize is the correct word when we go into that policy discussion. We might not need to incentivize owner occupancy. I think what Dan said is maybe we just need to educate
Sure.
the financing duplexes. Commissioner Stokebrand, did you have more? No? I have a few. I was a little shocked. Two things. When we talk in budget and in long range financial planning, over the years, median income for housing, we used to use 300,000. We're up to 400,000 in our planning budgeting process. I'm shocked that it was, what do we have in here as a median housing?
Home value?
Yeah.
Yeah, 334,000 was the 2018 census number.
Okay, has that gone up significantly? I wonder why we use 400,000 when we do it now.
I mean, it's been up since 2010, but I'm not aware of the 400,000. Is that in the long range financial plan, or where do you think that's?
Whenever we used to talk about taxes on a $300,000 house as the average, to say, well, for a $300,000 house, this is how much you're going to pay in tax. But I think it was Trustee Carpenter 2 years ago who asked that to be changed to 400,000 because at that time that's what we thought the median was. So can you just double check with Mark on why?
Yeah, I'll talk to Mark.
Okay, and then the cost burden. I was shocked to see that the cost burden of housing in all categories, I believe, except owners without a mortgage, and I think it's worthy to note somewhere in a footnote or somewhere, but is going down, which means that I'm assuming the owners without a mortgage are the elderly who have paid off their houses, right? And so that is worthy of explaining. In my opinion, that cost burden, that population, whoever that may be, is the one that's being burdened the most in the housing category. And I'm assuming it's because taxes are going up, continue to go up. I mean, what is making that cost burden go up, whereas renters and owners with mortgages go down?
And I feel like I should clarify this. So there are margins of errors within these numbers. So although it says that it's gone up 4%, if the margin of error is 2 or 3 on either side, that I just need to caution that these are estimates. So just take that for what it's worth. The housing study also referenced that a lot of these numbers are estimates, but that's the best that we can provide at this point. But I think your theory would make sense.
It would be nice to even ask the consultant. I mean, the cost estimate, yeah, it's could be off, but it was off in the opposite direction. You know what I'm saying? Like, why it could have just been all have gone down. And but why? What would be an explanation?
But in 2010, the rate on a 30-year mortgage was about a point higher too.
But this is without a mortgage, right?
No, I'm saying like if you look at the difference, taxes go up, right? So that's why their costs go up. Where is the other ones go down, right? Owner with a mortgage, their cost has gone down instead of up, right? And that's because the cost of a mortgage is less than it was in 2010.
So that would be worth noting then too. Whatever could be a rational reason of why those numbers are the way they are. I mean, it's good to have the numbers, but what could they mean?
President Rozek, this is Barb again. I think that you're right that, I mean, for those of us who are seniors and have paid off our homes, if we're retired, it's not that, say, the taxes have changed dramatically. It's that our income is not as high as when we were working. If we have investments and we have Social Security, so that equation shifted. So I think you're right in thinking that may be the issue behind that number.
That's a great point. I didn't even remember that, but yes. Thank you. And I think that is, we haven't gotten to block grant, right?
Correct.
I think it's also worth noting that seems to be a trend in the North Shore. I mean, Shorewood went up, Whitefish Bay went up quite a bit, Glendale went up. I mean, I would, in Wisconsin in general, the burden went down, but it seems to be all of us up here.
Without a mortgage category you're referring to, Eric?
Correct. Yeah.
And why? Why if Wisconsin went down?
Well, after looking at charts, I went on to Zillow. I was kind of shocked at their estimate of our home value. So if homes are selling, because if there aren't that many on the market at higher prices, then they're assessed higher. And, it's the same thing. Maybe even if the income stays the same or is going up, that the value of your assessment is going up faster. It's kind of shocking. Not to mention school taxes. But
utilities every other year are going up 25% or something ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, but to Barb's point, I've known a fair number of people that have just sold single-family homes, and a number of them are not even going to market. I mean, it's private seller. They don't even make it, to market. I mean, it's just hot. I mean, the prices are up because there isn't a lot of stock, and a lot of people want to live in Shorewood.
Right. And I think that's what the consultant said at the end of, Dan, you were there, weren't you? Basically, without more supply, your costs are going to continue to rise. So if you don't have more supply, and that was the end statement from the consultant that I remember.
Correct. Yep. We're a very desirable community in terms of our land use and our location, the type of housing that we offer. It's not cookie cutter, things like that. So it did definitely indicate that our desirability was a factor of affordability.
And our plan commission.
Yeah,
that's right.
Sure.
In general.
Well, I mean, but with that said, I think there is a general concern among all of us that folks without mortgages are paying a higher percentage
right.
of their income or whatever per year. So while it's nice to have a hot community where people want to move here, I don't want to necessarily do it at the detriment of seniors who can't stay here because they can't afford to live here. I mean, there's a natural turnover, but it's one thing to move out. It's a whole other thing to get pushed out because of tax burdens and what have you.
Yeah, I'm definitely hearing that this section is very discussion worthy. So I'll take a second look at this chart and perhaps provide more information and just confirm it. Maybe I'll reach back out to our housing consultant to see if they have any additional thoughts on how to do it. But affordability, I think, is going to be one of the larger themes of this particular chapter. So it's worth making sure that we have these numbers understood.
Great. Any other comments on this section?
One last question for Bart. The chart about the number of units in a structure. What is a 1 unit attached? Is that a duplex or a townhouse? That's like a condominium?
So yeah, that's a census term that in the previous comp plan was identified to be a condominium. I can't identify if that's accurate or not. So I just kept the census term of 1 unit attached. In the previous comp plan, they had changed that to condominium. So I think it's safe to assume that might be the case, but I just didn't feel comfortable changing the census term.
Okay, thank you.
Would you put it in like italics or maybe in parentheses?
I could, if I can confirm that that is an accurate translation, I'd be happy to do that. I just wasn't able to do that in the time that I had. So I'll make a note to see if I can confirm that.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions on that?
Yeah, I just have a real quick question. Sorry. Looking at the new housing units, unless we're about to talk about that, but looking at the new housing units, I would be interested to see the costs of the 389 new units that have been constructed since 2010. I know there have been a lot of discussion in the past about affordable housing or trying to diversify our housing stock, and you know, I would be interested to see what the price points on average were for those, you know, that were so sort of heavily subsidized by the village.
And maybe even know if they're if they have what's the right word for if they have ADA, you know, if they're made for older people for senior living, if they're dedicated units for people that need ADA provisions. I think that would be interesting. We're adding the ability for seniors to stay in place, right?
Mhm.
Or nearby, I'll say.
Right. I guess, you know, it would be the Oaks of Shorewood amount, you know, accounting for a quarter of the new housing stock, roughly.
And that's a 50+ community, right?
Right. So, you know,
ADA compliant. Yeah.
so maybe the other
They all have to be.
287 units, you know, what's the story on those? What are we looking at? What have we added?
But
I think the housing study has average rents for all of these, so it'd be easy to add a column on there, and then I can identify which ones have age restrictions, whether it's 55+ or specific senior requirements. The Light Horse has 17 affordable units, so that's worth noting that there is a set aside of affordable units within that development. So I think that's a good comment. It's an easy add, and we have the details, so I can throw it in there for sure.
Bart, aren't they all ADA compliant? It just
yeah, if they're new, they definitely should be. I don't know if ADA compliant is the right word, but they all should meet, you know, modern building code.
So there's a certain percentage that's required.
Yeah, whether they have grab bars, units, things like that. Yeah, Tim can probably answer that.
Yeah, so there's going to be a certain percentage that are what's called type A units, which have the grab bars and everything. There's a certain percentage that are type B units, which can be changed later on. So the blocking is in the wall to add a grab bar, but you don't necessarily have to put the grab bar in yet.
So is that worth so Commissioner Klein, is that something worth noting, or did you?
My comment was based on that we're a community that's creating more space for an older population to live comfortably, right?
Yeah, they'll all have elevators, you know, so it's easier access that way. And then the units themselves might have specific finishes that make them specifically ADA, like Tim pointed out.
Mm-hmm.
If we have that data, I can try to add that to the chart so that we understand.
Yeah, and also not just elderly, but just differently abled people have access to housing, right?
Oh, and I had a question about, so there's table 2.x residential building permits, and then table 2.x. I wonder if that should be new multi-unit housing construction permits. It just says new housing,
Right.
that second one.
The second one also does include a couple new single houses. So like you'll see in 2013, there was one new single family house, 2018, 2019. So this includes all new housing units. Most of them are in those larger structures, which is why they're noted separately.
Can you write next to number like 2013 one single family?
Yeah, I could. Yep.
So that you know,
if it's necessary, but I can clarify that.
or if it was a duplex or.
So I'm confused by something. So we only had one new house permit in 2019, single family in Shorewood. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so then what am I missing here? Residential building permits, single family 2019, 359. Is that for any kind of renovation?
Yep. So that's any renovation. It could include a fence, things like that. Yeah. So it's not a new unit. It's just the level of investment that we're seeing in the housing stock.
Okay.
Can I just ask one more question? Bart, when you add that column that we were just describing, or added that additional information for the new units, can you please just put in there what affordable means, what that is, what that price point is? I would be interested to see how that compares to the average rent for, you know, a duplex unit or something along those lines.
Yep, I can definitely try. The struggle with defining affordable is it's usually based on your own income. So it'd be affordable for the.
If we're going to say it's affordable, I'm interested to see what we mean when we say it's affordable, or what they mean when they say it's affordable.
Usually based, I think what Bart's trying to say is they'll say 60% of your income.
Right, so 60% of someone in Shorewood's income is different than 60% of someone in Milwaukee's income. So it changes on but HUD uses like the metropolitan region. So I can give the HUD definition, which is the most common, and I think we can just move on from there. But there are some nuances to other definitions, but I'll clarify the HUD definition of affordability.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
So am I reading this right? Between 2010 and 2018, we only had 2 single-family homes built and no duplexes.
And keep in mind, this is new, so if it's a replacement, so the sentence above says, this figure does not take into account units that have been removed or facilitate the new construction. So if they convert a duplex into a single family, that's not considered a new unit to us. It's not an addition.
I wouldn't consider that either. I'm just saying that says a lot. I mean, there's no land, basically.
Correct, yep.
So, I mean, that's...
Yeah, I mean, all of those were knockdowns, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Crystal would actually have the specific details on all 3 of those, I'm sure.
Yeah, every house that's gone up since I've started here has come from a house going down. The only house since I've started within the last 10 years that will go up on new land is the house on Wood, where that lot was split. There's a new house going up there, and that's the only lot that, to the best of my knowledge, because there hasn't been many, where a house is going up on a vacant lot.
Are all of these 2010 to 2018 listed? Were they all, maybe with an asterisk at the bottom, were they all based on knocked down, like land that has been reused?
The single family, I believe the answer is yes. So we can clarify that within the narrative or the chart, however it's easiest.
Even the multifamily, or no? I guess not. The O.
I don't know that those removed any housing units, but you would have the better insight on. It's mostly commercial development, I think, that took place on.
I think President Rosick, I think where the Oaks is there, didn't there used to be an apartment building back there that was taken down?
Yeah, you're right. There was a vacant building.
Yeah.
Where the Pig and Whistle restaurant was, and then there was some commercial building, and then there was some apartments closer to the river behind there.
Yep, that is correct.
So I think my point just being is as we're showing a picture to the outside community of Shorewood, I mean, everything that's been built since 2010 and probably before has been built on prior used land. I mean, land used for something. And I think that's important because we have no land. And that's one of the reasons our housing, costs keep going up. So it might be worth noting.
Right. The only way to go is up if you're going to add.
But not too high.
But not too high.
Or knock down and rebuild, correct? And
right.
Or accessory dwelling units. We've talked about that concept. There are other ways to add, light density to the neighborhood. So they're within the recommendations. I think a lot of these things will make sense based on how the data is playing itself out.
Thank you. I have a curious question. Why is the rental rate in Shorewood so much lower than Wauwatosa?
My assumption would be a lot of students, smaller, older apartment buildings that students tend to rent.
Wilson Drive.
That's all anecdotal. I don't have any evidence of that. That was actually asked, I think, within the housing study as well. and the consultant confirmed that it's difficult to pull out who's a student versus who's a tenant because there's just no way of identifying that. And so
I think another difference in the market with Wauwatosa is you have Freighter and the medical college. And so that's a high-end rental market, the people working out there.
Yeah, so they have nicer places, bigger plate, more square footage.
Yeah, newer units.
Multiple bedrooms.
I was gonna say, I thought it was because our units were so much older.
Right, correct. Yep, older units that are very attractive to students, whereas in other communities, they might have been renovated or redeveloped for someone else, but
Even with the drive, they're not.
Yeah, they're not glamorous.
I mean, they're not student housing, but they're not updated rentals.
Yeah, there's a lot of students in there on Western Drive. Yeah. Okay, I was just curious.
Okay, if there's no other questions on that, we'll move on to the next section, 2.6.
Sure. So yeah, construction activity, we talked about 2.6 housing programs. What we primarily have in terms of housing is code enforcement, which has its, advocates and its detractors, but it has, proven effective in terms of what it does in terms of maintenance of old housing stock. The biggest program that we had was the Neighborhood Improvement Loan Program, which has $535,000 of revolving loans available. As I mentioned, it's currently frozen, but over the past 10 or so years that it was available, we did provide 9 down payment assistance loans. We used to offer exterior maintenance loans. Those were removed from the eligibility list. 13 duplexes were converted with that, and attic improvements for 17 of those. So we were pretty active in terms of facilitating improvements to the housing stock that was frozen, like I mentioned, to see whether or not that still meets our goal. I do believe that program will be reevaluated and reestablished. So hopefully what this comp plan provides in terms of information will be utilized to help the CDA and village board identify how to relaunch that. And then we are eligible for CDBG funding because we're part of Milwaukee County Consortium. So qualifying households can get assistance to maintain their housing stock. It's typically elderly people that qualify for that. And then we do have Section 8 housing. River Park is a large Section 8 housing complex. We also might have individual vouchers within, whether it's duplex units or other multifamily apartments. I don't have a number on that specifically. I have reached out to try to find whether our participation in that has increased or decreased or stabilized. But those are the primary housing programs that I've noted within the plan.
Bart, one thing I always bring up, just because of the ICC, when I was listening about the block grant, can we add something about when I asked if we could use it here, they specifically said yes, especially in your senior center. And I can't remember, you were going to look into that.
So yeah, CDBG is, it's a county consortium where we can either apply for a program specific. If we don't apply for program specific, that money just goes to home repair program. So historically, we had put that money towards our senior center or smaller infrastructure projects. That's typically like $20,000 a year. Then about 5 or so years ago, we switched to not applying for program specific funding. We allocated it towards the county's larger home repair program. I'll be honest in saying communication with the county on the opportunities is difficult. I believe it's supposed to happen in August. I've received no communication from them in terms of how to apply.
We should reach out, because when I talked to the lady, it might be a new lady, she encouraged Shorewood. She said, we want Shorewood to apply, and she specifically said for the senior center. So I don't know if that can go in there. I don't know if there's a little more detail that can go in there, because it took me 5 years on the board to figure out that. So anything that can be more specific about what we can use it for here in Shorewood would be great.
Right, so with respect to the housing chapter, I just wanted to make it clear that CDBG, we currently do have access to the home repair program. We would have access to that either way if we did a program specific application, but for this purpose, that's why that's in there. But I can reach out to the county to confirm timing wise, because I believe it should have been in August.
Well, we got 3 more days. I don't know, 5 more days.
I would suggest, I was not aware that we had this home repair program through the county. And I thought, you know, it'd be great if the village just publicize that a little bit more, maybe included information on, you know, income limitations, who could participate. But especially as people want to stay in their homes as they age, but they need adaptation. So that would be a, you know, and our weather takes, you know, the exterior of our homes takes a beating with the winter. That might be a good thing for people to know about.
Yep, definitely. I know that I've published it in the village manager's memo within my time here, so I can definitely rerun that. And I also know Elizabeth at the Senior Resource Center provides pamphlets to people that reach out to her specifically from the senior community. So we can definitely help push that message back out there if it was an unknown program.
Can it do for code, like if you have a code violation, can it help with that?
I believe it can, but I don't quote me on that because I know that is a specific question, but I think it can.
Okay, 'cause that's huge. I mean, if someone's getting cited for a roof and they have no money for that year.
Correct.
Huge. Okay. Anybody else have questions on that section?
I would just clean up the language in that first sentence. 262, the program was established by the village through the CDA, was developed to serve as a catalyst to help Shorewood gain housing stock. Is that the point? It's hard to understand because I know you probably cut and paste, but was it to serve as a catalyst to help Shorewood gain housing stock?
Yeah, I don't like that word for sure. So
I'll shoot you an email with what I would.
Okay.
I thought maybe it was to enhance our aging housing stock.
I bet you that's it. I bet you it's aging that was either corrected wrong.
Okay.
Aging.
Okay, something like that. Something that's better than this, right? Thank you.
Yep, I think that's right, Barbara. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns or clarifications? If not, we'll move on to 2.7. I'm just going to step away from my computer for 1 second. So does anyone else need a break? If not, continue on. I'll be right back. I just need a tissue.
Sure. So 2.7 is kind of, as I mentioned, the to be developed section yet. So the background information has been provided. I can update it definitely for what we discussed here. But in terms of a comprehensive plan update, we discussed confirming that the previous goals still made sense. So these are the 3 goals that were in the previous comp plan, or the current comp plan, I should say. So maintain a wide variety of housing options that meet the housing needs of people of all ages and stages of life in single family homes, duplexes, condominiums, and apartments that are both attractive and well maintained. So a very general, broad statement. If we want to clean that up or expand it, we can definitely try to do that. Secondly, strive to retain and attract residents who value education, culture, and high quality of life. Oddly specific, perhaps, on the type of person, but once again, that was I think driven by the school district's declining enrollment back then. So then number 3 is maintain and improve private property and public infrastructure to maximize assessed real value of all real estate. So yes. So that's the current goals. If there's any thoughts on that, I definitely would like to hear that. But before we jump to it, I just want to note that I did list within the plan, and I don't have a page numbered version, but numerous bullet points that came to my mind as we were going through it. So if we want to kind of combine the conversations of the goals and those potential concepts, I'd be happy to do so. So whether it's here in the meeting live tonight or, you know, in an email afterwards, that's kind of what I'll be looking towards to draft the final version of that for the October re-review. So kind of looking for some insight, whether it's tonight or post-meeting, on how to move forward with that. I feel like you as the policy directors or recommenders in this case probably needed more input on that than I had at the moment. So I'm looking forward to anything that you might add.
I have a question really quickly. What it didn't capture for me, this section, was from the housing study, was the ultimate conclusion by the housing consultant. And that ultimate conclusion was 3 things that I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, whoever was there. Bart, you were there, and I believe, Dan, you might have been there. But one was, we do not need to subsidize market rate housing. There's no need in Shorewood. So that was a bold statement, but it was made. The second was without additional supply, and a lot of it, your housing costs are going to continue to rise significantly. And I don't remember if there was a third one, but those are the two that I remember sharply in my mind. And I don't see, before we get into goals and objectives and recommendations, I just wanted to share with the Plan Commission, did those two come through in this chapter that we just read? Whether you agree or not, I mean, that was the conclusion. And if they did or didn't, then we would, my guess, or my assumption is you take the conclusions and then you, and also, the third one was affordable housing for seniors. That affordable housing was something that we have affordable housing. If you remember this, we have a lot of affordable housing in Shorewood. It's just that it's filled with people who are paying rent that's not affordable, meaning people are willing to move into an affordable unit that could have low rent and pay high rent just to be in Shorewood. So even though they're affordable units, they're being taken up by people that are not poor. Am I saying that right? Not
Correct. Yep. In general terms. Yep.
They're just like, median income people. So those were the three main, striking conclusions that the study made, and I just don't see those three here in black and white.
I think I'll take a stab at that real quickly, if you don't mind. The first one, in terms of subsidizing, I think that one will come out in the economic development chapter, where they talk specifically about economic development programs and TIF and things like that. So we can definitely cross-reference those recommendations within this chapter too. So, but you are correct. They did indicate that they didn't feel there was a need to subsidize market rate housing in the village. They thought that the market would, bear that in general. So that was true. I think in respect to without the new supply, the costs will go up. I think the chapter makes the case that we are a built out community and that our costs are increasing. So it might be a natural connection, but we can definitely specify that within an objective or perhaps a recommendation specifically. And that's kind of where we're at in terms of this draft, is that I'm looking to see what you guys are reading out of it. That definitely was one of the consultant's big keys. And then senior affordability, I think with the cost chart that we had, I think that did kind of lend itself towards that. So once again, the bulleted list that I created on the next 2 pages hopefully has elements of all of those. But I did write all those 3 down to make sure that they are incorporated somewhere within the plan, because that is accurate in terms of what the study said.
Thank you. And then the last point I just wanted to make was with CDA Commissioner, I can't remember his name. It's not Joe. It's the other younger guy.
John Kraus.
John Kraus made a really good point at the very end, and I never got to explore that, but I think the Plan Commissioner should hear it. And it was, people were talking about adding triplexes or back houses or granny flats to add supply, and he made the point of, and the consultant didn't disagree, that it's not enough. That's not enough units to keep the cost down. You would need significant units like high rises or, and that was something I wanted to be able to explore before getting into the goals and objectives, because if that is correct, and I don't know if it is or not, then it would change my opinion on what our recommendations are.
Well, and I think that that's a good policy discussion in terms of, I think the consultant said if you don't add new units, your costs will go up. And then one of the recommendations was, consider ADUs. And as John pointed out, that the projections of what the new units were and adding a unit here and there wasn't going to be enough. So I think from a policy standpoint, without adding units, you would need to be comfortable with the costs going up with current situations. Now, economies change and other things like that happen, obviously, right, as we were experiencing this year. But I think that is accurate. If we are to meet the projected demand without increasing costs, supply would need to go up. And whether that's in, a 5th or 6th floor, and that's the discussion that needs to take place, is Are we comfortable with that in order to alleviate housing costs, or do we want to maintain the community character at the expense of affordability? So,
correct. That was huge to me, because the fact that, you know, that's been the crux of the community's conversation, but not as clear as day as what was made in that conversation with the consultant. And what John said was, you can add these three, you know, but if you look at the projections of the housing supply need in order to keep the costs the same as they are today without rising, it's a significant amount of units that aren't gonna, you're not gonna meet that with triplexes and back houses. So that was important for me to hear, because I do want to keep Shorewood affordable, and that's going to be a great policy discussion. That's all I have.
sure. Did anyone else, if you're willing to offer them tonight, I'd be happy to take them, but I am cognizant of the time. It's almost 8 o'clock. We've got 2 more chapters, so just
Barb, we
happy to hear it.
if we send you comments by email, when you're all through with this chapter, how many bullet points do we want to be including here for incorporation? Because we have, you know, a couple dozen right now.
Yeah, great question. I would, if we maintain 3 goals, which we have here, I would think each of them might be able to accept 2 or 3. So we're looking at potentially 6, you know, on the high end, 8, 10. It's not bad to include them. I just want to be realistic in terms of, if we include them, that means we can't do everything. So I would like for us to focus on the, you know, the top 5, 6, 7 that we think are what they need to be. I want to throw this out there. I considered perhaps creating a poll, you know, where the plan commissioners or the village board members or the public could prioritize the list that I had, you know, vote, and we can see what each individual group feels. And I think that would be something that's that people are happy to respond to. I think public engagement, sometimes when people listen too much, they don't really know what they're asked to do. But in terms of responding, I think with each of these 3 chapters, I could make an easy, you know, prioritization poll, send that out and document the plan commission's answers, the village board's answers, the CDA's answers, et cetera, and then the public. So that when we come back in October, there's at least some justification as why those 6 or 7 rose to the top. So if there's any objection to that, I'd like to hear it. If not, I think that would be part of my expectation within September to roll those out, perhaps week by week, and keep people interested in the process.
I completely love that idea. Here's my concern. There were 2 board members at the presentation for the housing study. So without tonight, you know, we're talking about the numbers, we're having this discussion. I feel comfortable with the plan commission taking that survey and you're prioritizing. For the village board, until that conversation is had, it's really hard for me. It's going to be the same. The reason we do a study is so that we learn from it. And I feel like the same, if people, a lot of people don't just brush over it until you have that conversation as a group. It's really hard for me to say, go ahead and send out that prioritization, because I feel like people are just going to prioritize based on what they've always known and how they've always felt.
And I do share that hesitation, which is why I kind of wanted to ask before I just did it, because I would not by any means use that as the, well, that got the number 1, that got the most votes, therefore it's what we need to put in there. I think it needs to be balanced, perhaps by this group, you know, because you are the recommending body of the plan. So I would just provide that for you as reference of what came in, but I would still look towards your expertise in.
My thought is, and plan commissioners, please chime in. I don't mean to overrule anybody. My thought is, send it to the plan commissioners. We've had the discussion. It helps us, instead of having to each individually email you our thoughts, that it would help organize. We've talked about it. Now let's see what prioritization we come up with. I think that we are here to advise the board, and not, so we're not there yet with the board. We should figure out what we're advised, what we are thinking, and then when we come up with recommendations, we send it to the board, and then the board gets to have that discussion, and then also either prioritize or take that advice. I just don't know that we need to hear from them at this moment. That's my opinion.
I agree with President Rozak. When looking at all this information, and specifically going back to the conversation that we just had regarding a massive increase in housing stock as the only viable way to keep affordability down, that education is an important part of making these decisions or making these recommendations. And if there are community members or board members that don't have that education because they did not participate in this, it can, and I know this is not a terribly scientific poll and we're not using it as an end all be all, but I go over enough polls at work all week long to know that if it's an uneducated group, you're going to get a pretty skewed sample. And I think that the example that President Rozak gave us is a perfect example of what would happen, because all of us will say we want affordable housing and it will come up as one of the top ones, and none of us until tonight or until you had participated in that education portion of that study would know that that requires high rises based on the information that was given. So I agree. I think it should be the folks that make the recommendation that have the knowledge. I don't have a problem participating in a poll. I just don't know what we're going to get from 2 out of 7 board members participating. And the community, if they haven't done this, wouldn't know either. So I just don't want to skew the results and then have people come back and say, no, affordable housing was the #1 issue. We need to start doing stuff on that without recognizing that means a high rise on Wilson Drive or somewhere else.
Right. And I guess what I'm confused a little bit about here is, so the focus groups, I thought we were paying a consultant to bring all this data from the focus groups. And it's going to be hard for me without that input. I thought, didn't we have like 20 or 30 people in those groups to help me just...
I can definitely share the summary of that. Like I said, apologies, I did not get to it. She gave it to me, I want to say early or late last week or early this week. So that summary is available, but to your point, it was only 20 or 30, and the people that came in, had various levels of education on the housing study or on other things. It was kind of more of a raw conversation, and so I'm happy to provide that as well. But I do understand and appreciate President Rozak and Eric's point of, this is the recommending body, the Plan Commission. This really is an important role, and you guys participate in these meetings and hear the conversations, and you give up your nights for these kind of things. So I'm happy to at least summarize where you're coming from, because I think that does provide a more educated, data set. So, but I will also share the focus group summary, because I do have that. I just didn't get a chance to get it out.
Okay, and I guess my other question is, do they help us all parse through, like you've come up here with 17 all good ideas after the 1, 2, 3 already in the plan. Do our consultants not help us work through these and the ifs, ands, whats about if we go with one item over another? They're not here at all tonight.
So correct, they will review what we've drafted, but we hired them for those specific 3 chapters and to do public engagement and to put the plan together. The village-led chapters are the ones I'm presenting, and they're supposed to be based on the previous effort. So the housing study, primarily for this one, the transportation study for the next one. So they will definitely review and give me their feedback, but they're not here tonight because this really wasn't part of their scope. We had hoped and thought that these update chapters would be a little more straightforward, and I still think they are in terms of, I probably have more knowledge than they do in terms of where we're at, because I participate in those things. So I'm still completely on board with this makes sense. It is a lot of work if we wouldn't put the right, time into it. So they will review what we have, but we did not hire them for these particular chapters.
Can I just help assist on that, Bart on that? We didn't have enough money or enough time. We didn't allow either of those. Now, a true comprehensive plan update, like in Milwaukee, took us 5 years. But, you know, or two, I think it was 3 to 5 years, I can't remember. And then we did sub-plans. We decided on just a quick comprehensive update. And that typically when communities do that, it's just updating data. Unfortunately, fortunately, we've had some great studies that we've paid for that, like the housing study, this was the best study I have seen, and I told this to Bart afterwards. I was so impressed with this consultant and the study that came and the resulting study that came out of this. But nobody's had time to really talk about it. That's going to be our role right now, because we are going to then utilize it to change or keep our housing policies moving forward. And that's what a comp plan does. So we got lucky in the fact that we had the study done, but unlucky that the time frame's so short and that, you know, it's significant. And the Plan Commission is going to be the one that makes those recommendations to the board. So really, Bart is correct. He knows just as much as those consultants do. He was part of that study. So trust him on that. It's going to be our job to talk through it. And that's why I keep bringing up, this is what it means if you pick this, you know, and Bart will do the same thing, but we're going to come up with policy recommendations. That's our job. And then for the ones that we don't have any data on, those are the ones we actually utilize the funds for to hire the consultant, because they have to come up with something. So if we want more, we can always budget more and do more, you know, extend the timeline. Budget comes up, what, in October?
Correct.
So again, if you're feeling really bad about, you know, if we're getting too close to it and we're like, we just need more, I understand that. You know, I'm all for doing the right thing. So this is a start, and we'll see how it goes. We definitely did not have enough money to rehash the elements that we had already paid to study.
Well, I guess, you know, for me, the problem is I see 17 items here and I think I want them all. So, you know, I just have to, you know, go through the housing study and try to come up with the top 5.
Yeah, and there's definitely probably ways to merge some of those concepts together. Every time as I was drafting, I would write something down in the, you know, in a piece of paper somewhere else. And when I came back, I just kind of summarized them all. So this end section, I think, is the most important section: goals, objectives, recommendations, obviously. So I need more time to synthesize that and to hear your thoughts on it. And I can come back and, you know, merge that thought with the housing study and everything together. I need some more time on it. So there are 17. I wouldn't have put them on there if I didn't think they were valid. So I hope they are. There's probably more.
I think that the survey will be good. I mean, to prioritize. And if any of the commissioners feel they need more information, just please provide the link to that housing study. It was a quick read for me. So.
Yeah, there's an executive summary. It's probably 10 to 12 pages. There's a lot of data behind that, but the executive summary is really, I think, comprehensive and worth a second look.
One of the best.
And then, as you mentioned, some of this will dovetail with economic development, because, for example, I think one of them talked about the tax levy, doing something with the tax levy, which would be affected by the economic development, right?
Correct. Yep. And we'll get to that one hopefully later tonight. I need some more information from the assessor on that, so that's kind of incomplete at the moment, but it's definitely an important part of what I've heard over the past 3 years in budget conversations.
So, I mean, I guess for me, it's like we keep coming up with the things about, you know, the tax rate is too high. And so how do you approach that as a recommendation or a goal in a comprehensive plan section on housing?
I don't think it's on housing.
I mean, it could be in housing, but it could in economic development perhaps is where I'd probably focus on that. And I think in the past we have had a strategy of redevelopment to, you know, add commercial value that would then, you know, share the burden more effectively with single family home ownership. So I think part of the redevelopment plan strategy of Oakland Avenue was to increase the commercial value you know, to kind of reposition single families predominance within the village. So you can't add, you have to add value if you want to decrease the overall percentage is what it amounts to. So if that is a priority, it's finding what levels of redevelopment we're comfortable with.
Do you have the statistics? I think the Plan Commission would really benefit from this. There's one sentence of how much value our commercial is, and then what taxes that produces, and how much value in the village comes, meaning dollars value, comes from residential, and what that produces in taxes. That was amazing for me to see that statistic. It was, residential is like,
I think I just talked to Mark about that, and it was 80% of our property tax comes from residential and 20% from commercial, but I don't have that. I'm not sure. I guess another thing it gets into a policy question is if we started at the village level charging more for services through fees as opposed to property taxes, would that be one way to come at the affordability question?
Yeah, if the taxes actually get lowered.
True. Yep. So in issues and opportunities, I think the taxes and the level of service is one of the things that she's identified. So she's going to be working on that part of the chapter. To the question of percentages, I did ask the assessor through Mark for that data. I have not gotten it yet. I'm not sure if they're referencing old stuff when they talk to you or not, if they're looking for new stuff for me, but I have not gotten that report. It's definitely important, and it's in the economic development chapter currently highlighted as to be continued. So.
And Bart, I know this is like we're jumping around here, but you know, they dovetail on each other. In the section 6.8, I know the assessor's inserting the information on assessments and tax rates and stuff, but I mean, it'd be helpful to go take some of this information from housing, you know, the increase in value of homes. You know, obviously, if the mill rate remains the same and the values go up, we collect more taxes. It makes it less affordable. But if you drop the mill rate as you know, the values go up, that changes things. It'd be interesting to see over time what our mill rate has done in comparison to what home values have done. That may be something to talk about including in here, because there weren't any sections that include what our historical mill rate has been and what that compares to other areas.
And I think it's way more important to do with the school district included, because you know, all honesty, and I'm not saying it for any other reason, but historically, the village has dropped the mill rate when assessments have gone up.
Yep.
The school district has not. They have consistently kept the mill rate, no matter how high the assessments went. And so I don't think people understand what that means, Dan, and you've hit it on the head. But our tax bill, we only tax like 28% or 20-something% the village. The school's 48 or something ridiculously high. So when we talk about tax rate, we really have to explain in that economic development chapter how you can change it, because it's not going to be us. So I think you hit it on the head with the mill versus the assessment. But again, it can't just be the village, because we've been doing that. And the issue is the major taxing entity within the village has not. And I'm not blaming anyone, and I'm just stating a fact. And so if you want to change the tax rate, or the tax, you know, the taxes on a household, you got to involve that. Maybe that's an intergovernmental relations chapter, but that is huge.
Yeah, and that's right, Allison. I think that's a good point to highlight the difference between the two and historically what's been done with the mill rate, because there have been efforts in some places to control that and others not. And on top of that, you know, when we're talking, especially since the big focus of our conversation is on affordability, you know, affordability, when a house increases, you know, when prices are going up, it makes it less affordable, but it also increases, you know, everyone's value in their home, right? Whereas taxes continue to go up. That's just, I don't want to say it's money just taken out of your pocket, because that's not the right way to say it, because we get great value living in the village of Shorewood and everything's fantastic, but it's money down the tubes. You know, if this year your taxes go up 15%, you're not getting anything else. And in fact, we're going to charge you now to take your garbage at some point, you know, eventually that sucks. So it's just something to highlight these changes, because that's what really drives affordability in our community.
And I just want to let you guys know my power is at 7%. So if it does,
Oh, might have just.
I think she's gone.
I just had to plug my phone in too.
So yeah, on that note, hopefully she can rejoin us, but there are 2 more chapters to get through tonight.
Can I just add one thing, 2 things actually real quickly? That first chapter, that first sentence and section, that second point about attracting residents who value education and culture and a high quality of life sounded a little elitist and exclusionary to me, especially when one of those bullet points on the next page said we want to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion within our housing policies. And I think diversity includes economic diversity. So we might want to, you know, rethink, even if that was true historically, might want to rethink how welcoming that sounds in
I agree.
in our mission. And the only last thing, and we probably don't have time to go into that, is one point was exploring opportunities to extend TIDS for 1 year to support affordable housing. And I didn't quite get, well, how, if you just extend it for 1 year, how is that money going to be repaid to close the TID in 1 year? But that's probably a discussion for another time.
Yep, that's allowed per state statute, and the CDA will actually be taking that up in September. So if you want to tune into the CDA meeting in September, they'll definitely be discussing that more thoroughly. It's allowed by the state of Wisconsin for us to do that. So it is a conversation, but we can talk about it later.
Okay.
So yeah, with that, if we could move the transportation, a very robust conversation on housing, but we got 2 more. Maybe transportation will be less less debated, but we'll get.
Have you met us before?
We can all take a pledge not to participate, but I think that'd be fun.
No,
Barbara couldn't do that anyway, no matter what.
I enjoy the conversation, so I'm cognizant of all of our times, and my apartment is like 90 degrees right now, and I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt for some reason, but
take it off.
we'll get through it.
There's all nice apartments in Shorewood with central air, Bart.
Yeah, I know. I've got a light flashing on my face. It's not making it any better, so. So I'll just start with the comp plan, and once again, jump in as you have any comments. So 3.1 is an introduction, pretty straightforward. 3.2, our current vision statement is that Shorewood will be a vibrant urban community with strong multimodal transportation infrastructure that meets transportation needs, pretty straightforward. And then we're also financially responsible.
I have one, I think it's a typo. After 3.2.1, stakeholder input, villages transportation and planning analysis, I think that's supposed to be parking.
That's correct. Thank you.
Okay. Yep.
So yeah, that's our vision statement. I think it's pretty, self-explanatory in terms of promoting multimodal, which means bike, ped, transit, everything else in between. And then financially responsible in terms of making sure that we spend our money wisely to keep it well maintained, which historically I think we have a good track record of. In 3.3, I go through the transportation framework and I reference the long-range financial plan. I think, at least in my experience, that's been Shorewood's most well-documented planning effort in terms of how we fund our transportation and plan for those improvements. So I've referenced that extensively in terms of how this chapter is laid out. In terms of framework, the Department of Public Works has historically been the transportation kind of leg of the administration. That's a little bit nuanced in that we contract with a village engineer. So in terms of transportation improvements, actually, DPW would reference the village engineer. I know in the past the planning department has also been involved. So we kind of have a, I wouldn't say a black hole necessarily, but in terms of having one particular person in charge of it, I feel like sometimes I've struggled in finding that voice. So I think if we were to adopt some sort of complete streets policy or something like that, which I think will be recommended, I think that will help clarify who makes these recommendations and to what bodies. So I think that's something that we can look forward to doing, and the transportation plan did recommend something like that. And then in terms of volunteer committees, we have an active pedestrian and bicycle safety committee. So that's the one committee that's primarily focused on transportation issues. So things often get routed through them. Perhaps I missed some other committees if you have any thoughts on that, but that's essentially my framework of how I see transportation planning functioning in Shorewood currently.
We do have a department. We do have a public works committee, standing committee. I know it's the village board, but it is a subcommittee. I don't know if that makes sense.
I considered putting them in here, so I'll take a second thought on that. I didn't put other standing committees elsewhere, so but I'll take a look at that.
Yeah, because like housing goes to CDA, but transportation goes to the standing committee.
Yep, I think that would make sense. Like I said, I did think about it. I just didn't pull the trigger for whatever reason, so I'll take a second look at that.
Okay.
And then in the interest of moving forward, once again, jump in if you have anything, feel free. The next section is our transportation network, which is primarily our roadways, which includes arterials, collectors, and local roads. We also do have traffic controls and calming, which get quite a bit of conversation, at least from the residential request standpoint. And then everything in the kitchen sink: bridges, trucking, airport, water, rail, public transit, taxi ride, bike, ped, disability parking. It's all in there. It's pretty generic in terms of its background, but we do have specific efforts toward bike and ped and roadways. So I think I've kind of highlighted more of those within the plan.
Will you have a chart? Will you have like a map of the roadways, like colored?
Yep. So there'll be a general map in 3.4 is the hope. And that's actually a good perhaps comment. So all these maps I've identified, I want to make like a full list of the maps before I submit the work order per se, just to keep it realistic in terms of what we should be spending on mapping for the effort. So I've kind of outlined them. If you feel there's more or less that you'd like, feel free to weigh in on that. But I do intend on including a general map. We actually have that from the transportation plan, so I can probably copy and paste that one without having to recreate it, hopefully so.
Okay.
In terms of conditions and maintenance, we do have local road and sidewalk programs. So I've discussed those, and DPW is actually working with our GIS consultant on a map that shows the recent improvements and the projected improvements. A lot of that is in the long range financial plan. So once again,
don't forget alleys.
Yes, and alleys they're with the street program, correct? It's every other year.
I would just say local road, alley, and sidewalk programs.
Okay, I'll specify alleys. Good point. So yeah, once again, kind of taking what we already do and putting in the comprehensive plan, so it's not recreating anything. Hopefully, it's just kind of redocumenting what we already know into one common comprehensive plan. I briefly introduced state and regional planning. That primarily leads with state highways. So Lake Drive is upcoming within a WISDOT plan. Sewer package recommended various improvements as well, whether it's transit and things like that. So we make reference to them, but most transportation planning is done locally, and improvements are done locally, but we do have those larger entities that do from time to time, have projects within our community.
What about the county in like Estabrook Road?
That's a great question. I don't know if they have, improvement plan for that roadway.
It's just come up a lot lately. Like who owns it?
Yeah, my understanding, definitely a county-owned roadway. I don't know if there are any county park plans that would document, any sort of maintenance or improvement plans, but I can reach out to them. I know people in the Parks Department that hopefully can help me build that out, and I can add that to that chapter as well. I can call it state, regional, and county plans.
Excellent.
So good point. And then, well, that was really quick. So hopefully I didn't go over too much that you wanted to talk about, but then we would move into the goals, objectives, and recommendations. Within the current plan, we have two goals: to maintain and improve private property and public infrastructure to maximize assessed value of all real estate. I've got to say that's a bit awkward for me, so I would definitely look at rewording that one. And then secondly, strive to maintain and attract residents who value urban living, walkable, and in walkable, safe neighborhoods. Once again, I'm not sure that's necessarily a goal for the transportation plan. That might be more of a, I don't know where that would go.
I agree.
So I think I would reword these unless you guys have greater thoughts. I definitely probably would reference the transportation plan that we had to look at the overarching goals. There was 4 of them, I believe, in terms of accessibility and things like that. So I'm probably going to end up rewording these. So I look forward to your comments either now or written after the fact. So I'll open it for discussion if you have any thoughts on those.
I just had a question. Was there anything on parking in the goals section? I didn't really see anything.
Will there be anything? It's a good question. Trying to look at what I put down. I know I cover parking in the chapter itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's see if I wrote anything specific to that.
I think, wasn't there just a mention from the transportation and parking study that we have surplus parking?
Right, there was.
To Tim's point, I'm not sure I listed that as one of the concepts, so good catch, because parking is part of this chapter.
Huge.
Yeah, for those following board discussions, we are looking at modifying currently the overnight parking. That'll be coming up in a special board meeting on Monday. And then the Tuesday after Labor Day, we'll probably have the actual result of that. Well, hopefully, potentially, I should say. And then we're also looking at alternate side parking, winter parking. So the plan itself that, once again, we already paid for does have those recommendations in there. So it's a matter of just transferring them into this one. So I'll make sure that those get in there. Have one goal specific to parking at that point, which I think does make sense because it's a big conversation always.
Bart, you did have a paragraph on parking, section 3.4.11, and I did think it ends with discussion of implementing the recommendations within the analysis and so on. And I thought, well, as you're working on the final draft, perhaps by then the village board will have voted on some of those consultant recommendations in the transportation study. And then you could just, maybe update it based on what they voted on to change.
Yeah, and to Tim's point, I should probably put it in the, the more actionable section at the end.
Okay.
But yeah, hopefully we have some momentum on that before January. So definitely worth keeping an eye on.
I would say
you
for
may just want to mention that there's a mix of public and private lots available, just as a point of information.
Yep, good point.
I think, Bart, my biggest thing with transportation coming from the transportation study is consistency. So whether that means stop signs, like being consistent on how they're placed to improve safety, because we kind of just haphazardly put them wherever they're requested over time. Consistency with our bike lanes, consistency with, our loading zones, just consistency is what I got from that study. And, whether it's the complete streets, but something that makes it consistent. The other thing was signage, making it like people understand the circulation patterns or the parking pattern. So it's like consistency is the best word I got.
Yeah, and now that you say that, I'm remembering the 4 goals of the plan were communication so that people understand, what our policies are, consistency in terms of administration so that we, maintain a certain level of comprehension on those, accessibility, making sure that our network is accessible to the most number of people that need to use it, and then enforcement, making sure that we adequately enforce the policies that we have. So those are the 4 overarching goals. So I'll work those definitely into something within this section. That makes the most sense.
That's fabulous.
I have just a couple of real quick things to mention. In the bike infrastructure chapter, I thought you may want to include a statement about that the village had a bike sharing system for a couple of years, but our provider had an unsuccessful financial or business model, and so those 7 bike stations were removed in whenever it was 2019. Just so that 10 years from now, when this is being updated, or there's things, there's a new cast of commissioners or board members that there's some historical basis or information that, we did try this and just the way that it was done in the past did not work. And so,
Yep.
And I would say also, even though it might be outside the time frame, is it 2026 when the state is going to reconstruct Lake Drive? And you might want to include that date, and then say the village, restriped Lake Drive to one lane in each direction only, and whatever year that was, 2018 or 2017.
2025 reconstruction.
Oh, okay.
I think they moved it up 1 year. The
You can say
research is a good conversation because that definitely will probably come back up again. So I think documenting why we did that would be a useful sentence or two.
Okay. So I've got, I don't want my phone to die again.
Yeah, I do think one other thing you're going to hear from Trustee Ursink, I think has been saying it consistently, as other board members have, is green infrastructure in the transportation system. So I don't know where that fits, but.
So I think our community, another chapter is titled sustainability. So I think we'll definitely include it there, but I can cross-reference it here as well, just to make sure that we're including it within complete street conversations, et cetera, things like that. So
yeah, I know he'll bring it up
somewhere else, but we can reference it within here as necessary.
Yep.
Okay, well, that was relatively quick. Like I said, if you have thoughts on it after the fact, feel free to let me know, but this is intended to be kind of just a summarization of previous efforts. Hopefully it's not too shockingly new on some of this stuff, so just...
one other thing, I apologize. The last thing I remember the transportation people saying was that we should continue to follow basically the PACER. So there's a PACER report out there that we do, and it talks about if as long as you maintain your roads every blah 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 years, and we outline our own as everybody in the state is required to do, then it extends the life of the pavement and saves you money in the long run. I think that is something that needs to go into our discussions when we talk about transportation as a policy. Do we still want to follow that? We're not following that right now, just so everyone knows. And so we're not saving that long-term money. And so it's just something that's very important because the state mandates it, that we do this report, and we used to, and we've kind of made other priorities. So it's just worthy of discussion at some point.
I will definitely reach to Leanne, Director of Public Works, on that particular point, because I'm sure she'll have some language to include for it. So good point. Okay, so once again, feel free to submit anything that you might have after this meeting or before the next meeting. I'm happy to, or give me a call, whatever you prefer. So the comp plan.
Should we be emailing you our priorities for those suggested goals or concepts at the back?
Or will you be sending us out something?
Yeah, I think I'll probably do a poll on all three of these chapters.
Okay.
And like I said, I might split them out by a week to week, so that they're not all at once, for my sake and your sake. So I think that's my intention for all of these chapters, to get at least your specific educated feedback on those components.
Thank you.
So then the economic development section is the next chapter. It's chapter 6 in the current plan. I started with an introduction on economic development, which I felt I needed to include a definition for, because I know within recent strategic planning, a lot of questions came up as to what exactly it meant. So feel free to reference the introduction, and if that makes sense to everyone, great. If you have any clarifications on that, feel free to let me know. But I kind of wanted to set the stage for what this chapter should be about. With respect to our vision, we talk about Shorewood being a vibrant urban community with opportunities to work in and to grow successful profit and nonprofit businesses, and attractive, thriving local service, retail, and hospitality businesses. And then once again, we also reiterate that we should be a financially responsible community with strong property values and a competitive tax rate. So to the housing questions that we received before, this chapter does or will get into assessments and tax rates. So I don't have that in there quite yet, but our vision statement does specify, that that's what we strive to be. So I think it's important to include it within this chapter. In terms of framework, I identified the CDA, our bid, and once again, the Planning and Development Department as the people who enforce and oversee a lot of these programs and activities that we do, all once again led by policies adopted by the village board primarily through budgeting. So if you have any thoughts or comments on how I've identified those groups and their responsibilities, feel free to either weigh in now or whenever. Definitely want to get the bids feedback on this chapter because they are a large component of how we interact with our business community. So it's important that we're all on the same page for this one. I do then list a current business environment. So as you're probably aware, hopefully aware, we do require occupancy permits for all commercial businesses in the village. As of August 1st, I want to believe we have 245 of them. 54% are in the service industries, 21% office, 13% food and beverage, and 12% retail. So just a current snapshot of where we're at so people understand what we mean when we talk about our business community.
Do you have in here the top employers? I thought that was an amazing, it sticks in my mind. So the top employers are the school?
I don't have them specifically.
I mean, it was like the school, us, Metro Market, and then Walgreens. That should tell you a lot.
And was that from the housing study, do you recall? I know it was in there, but
no, it's nope, it was the census, or it wasn't the housing study.
Okay, I might reach back out to you if you can think of that one, because I tried to find that, I couldn't find it. What I do have is somewhere in here, it talks about how essentially, it's the grocery store essentially is what it amounts to. It was a very generic census description, which you could read into it. The census does not document public administration as a section, so that's where the school would have been.
Where did that come from then?
Right, so.
God, but it was the school, our government, the village, Metro Market, and Walgreens are our top 4 employers. And it gave you actually the amount of employees.
Yeah, if we can think of where that comes from, that'd be really valuable, because like I said, I tried to find something of that, but public administration is not listed by the census, so that doesn't include the school and the village, which are 2 large employers, obviously.
Crazy. It just shows, I mean, the reason the statistic is so powerful is it shows we need office development. Like we need, or a hotel, or something where there's employment that can, support a lunchtime crowd, that can support, we just don't have employees here, big employees.
Yep, and I think that will come through within this chapter and within the recommendations, hopefully. Then I do reference our opportunities analysis, which is from the 2014 Central District Master Plan. I feel like there might be some comments on this one specifically, perhaps, but it does identify our trade areas, and it specifically references that our most successful businesses are typically serve the local trade area as opposed to regional. We're not on a highway. People don't come here from far distances, so we really are kind of a walkable, small-scale community when it comes to retail. So that plan did recognize that our trade area is quite small for our most successful businesses. We don't have a regional draw. We're not on the interstate. We're not downtown Milwaukee, et cetera. But so that's in the current analysis. It also
it's kind of like why we have no chain fast foods. They just don't come here. It's not that we prohibit. I mean, we prohibit them probably too, but we just, if you don't have a Burger King, you know that your trade area is pretty small.
Right, yep, they feed on each other typically. And then we do have some sector gaps, which I identified just in terms of what things people leave the community to go out and purchase, and whether that's, online or to a large big box, that's just a fact of life. And then that plan did identify redevelopment opportunities, which for better or worse are still in that plan. So if there's anything in there that we don't feel should be maintained, feel free to let me know or review that. But the state does require that we include opportunities within this chapter. And so that's what I'm referencing when I do reference the opportunities. So once again, the CDA will be reviewing this at their meeting in 2 Fridays from now. So they'll also weigh in on whether or not they feel like that list is current. but it is, a relatively important thing to review.
Art?
Yes.
I had a problem with the master plan when it was written back in 2014. And in that second full paragraph on that page, it mentions how the master plan identified underutilized properties that presented opportunities for continued investment, density, and redevelopment and all that. And it was then, and I still think it is today, a very subjective evaluation, especially when we consider these are private properties that we're discussing. So, the village may decide, hey, these properties could be put to better use. And some of the ones that were in the master plan with concepts for redevelopment into larger or multi-story buildings, are kind of off the table. One is because the corner bakery was developed. One was Ruckus was put up. And so those aren't available anymore. But I don't know if there's a way to, talk about these possibilities with different language, because otherwise I just think it's a kind of an insult to the property owners, but to say that, it's not the best use of this property. Well, if they have customers and they're doing a good business, who are we to say? Anyway, that's just my philosophy of it. And
I think that must tie into, so in the open house, we had a map, a very general map of susceptible to change.
There.
So that might be a better term per se. That will be in the land use chapter. So I know Vandewall is working on that. So they're looking at places that, whether they have a large, nothing's large, it's a parking lot or one-story development, things like that, where the market just in general at some point will likely change that, whether or not the village steps in or not. So maybe merging the concepts of opportunities and places that are susceptible to change might be worth talking about. I'll probably wait a little bit until I see what the land use chapter looks like to formalize that map. But that is a good point, Barbara. And we did kind of discuss that in different terms so that people understand that it's not necessarily that the village is being proactive or saying that this has to go away. We're just saying we think the market will eventually step in.
Right.
Can I elaborate on that for a second? I so agree with Commissioner Kylie Miller and our director, Bart, in the sense that in the 70s, we used to have renewal communities. And that was when you would slap around a boundary called a redevelopment boundary. And then you would adopt that. And then you would go and you could use TIF, or you didn't have to, and you would literally, it was blight, and you would demolish things. You would, or acquire them by eminent domain. I don't think, in my opinion, we have any intent to eminent domain things at this point. And most communities don't. And so when it's presented as was the master plan, that's what it sounds like to me is the renewal communities, where you're going in and you're saying, where is the opportunity to eminent domain and slap these boundaries around things to make it more taxes coming in. So that's the reason you would do it. Like take a one-story building and take it down and build 10 stories because you get more taxes and, provide more housing or whatever the reasons. But I think that if you can call it and define it, as you said, Bart, what might the market change in general, since we're landlocked and we have no land? Here are some of the places we see based on this, based on the fact that there's a parking lot, that there's a one story, not that we're going to do it, but to make it very clear that the market may eventually do it, makes the most sense.
Did you have something else, Barbara, as well?
No, I mean, I did look up those addresses in the central business district master plan, just so I knew which ones we were talking about. I mean, the 1700 East Capitol Drive, that's where Sage Pharmacy went, on that kind of corner there, that block. And so, some of these things are empty lots or surface parking lots. Some of them, have businesses there now, like the Shorewood Pharmacy, in place where the Thompson Pharmacy used to be. So again, I just wanted to know, what are the differences between these two groups? That's why I looked them up. And I just want us to be careful not to be insulting businesses. I know the one the old plan, the master plan says, yeah, let's tear down Starbucks, Benji's, you know, the old Verizon station and put something up. And it's like, well, yeah, Benji's is pretty much lumped in Shorewood. So, you know, they might get a lot of pushback on, I don't know. I just think we need to be very careful about saying, you know, yeah, you're here, people love you, but, you know, we can do better.
Yep, great points from both of you, I think. So I'll definitely try to rework this because I don't need to use the same terminology. I'm just referencing that document per se. So I think I discussed in the objectives section or the concept sections whether or not we want to update or perhaps sunset that plan just because it does have, you know, a different tone.
Sunset. I'm all for sunsetting.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think it is in there. So point well taken. I can definitely try to, you know, modernize the language for how I understand we want to move forward with that kind of concept.
Yeah.
And so there's no way, no place or method to deal with something like a Daniel Katz situation in this, right?
Well,
yes,
we could. So the CDA did talk about, and I'll be honest that I was not in favor of recommending it, but you know,
me either. 10 years.
Vacancy registration kind of programs, things like that. So if one of the objectives is to reduce vacancies, you could look at programs to, you know, target perhaps habitual vacancies. I find that very difficult, quite honestly. So, but to your point, Trustee Stokebrand, this would be the place to discuss any particular.
Are you talking about, Trustee Stokebrand, the vacancy program, or are you talking about, which I agree with, if you did want to do an opportunities renewal boundary, you could slap it around the entire CATS building. You know what I mean? Like you could designate that. And we've talked about that at the CDA over 10 years, and no one's willing to do it because of until you have a tenant, it's not economically feasible for the village to do so because we're too small. But in the city of Milwaukee, that's something they would do. They would put it in their comprehensive plan. They'd slap a boundary around that entire building, and they would say, this is an opportunity. And then eventually, like they did in the Valley, they would eminent domain and, you know, redevelop it themselves or find a developer. But the CDA has never pulled the trigger on that because of economic realities. But I didn't know if that's
well,
what
now he's got the prime location temporary,
right.
at least for now, filled. So it's
right.
not the situation it was, but that Wells Fargo bank building, I just wonder, my fear is that the architectural beauty of that building will just,
exactly.
it's gonna, you know, not be maintained, and we'll lose that architectural gem and a cornerstone of an important intersection, and have done nothing well except watch it go down, right?
Yep, and I think it's worth discussion, and I would agree with you, of putting it in a comprehensive plan, even if it's saying we aren't intentionally eminent domain it, but that we hope that a private entity would would redevelop this area.
Is that something that you wouldn't want to tip your hand on legally or in terms of negotiations?
Are you talking about eminent domain?
Any way of saying, you know, I mean, do we sort of let him know, well, you know, we've decided to put a target on your back?
Oh, he already knows. We've been talking about it for 10 years. So I think it's worth.
I have no idea. It seems to me if there's some way that we want to at least put that into a plan. I mean, I don't know how many open spots does he have now in the village. I don't know what his real estate holdings are besides that large piece from Oakland North.
Yeah, I think it's worth putting in there that if there was one spot for a renewal boundary, that would be the one that I would put. because the corner property is Art Deco. I mean, you're absolutely correct. It has character.
Yeah, I can't quite find it easily, but I do believe this chapter, excuse me, this chapter references commercial code enforcement and, you know, concepts of historic preservation and character. So if it's not in there, I can be more specific, but with respect to that building, that is something that, you know, my department does enforce that kind of stuff. So as we see things deteriorating, we definitely will send notices, you know, whether it's to replace windows or paint deteriorating elements of the facade, et cetera. So That aspect is covered a little more softly than, a redevelopment plan per se. But there is some component of that within this chapter. Hopefully, if not, I'll add it, but I think it's in there somewhere.
Okay. So I guess the larger question is then, is this where we would ever, or is this not the place where we would need to have a policy discussion about, do we ever want to let a building go vacant for 10 years again in Shorewood with doing, and
I think this would be the place to identify.
How would you stop
and you
that?
recommend not? You recommend not putting something in, Bart?
Well, I can just say the vacancy program that I reviewed coming in here didn't make sense to me. I'm not saying that's not something that you could do about it, but I definitely wouldn't recommend that particular draft. But it could be like, if something's vacant for so long, at least in the CD, looks at whether or not they need to be more proactive in terms of redevelopment or finding a business to locate or something in there. But in general, we don't have the capacity to be that proactive on some of these things just based on the size that we are. But if something is become, habitually vacant, I think at that point it would rise to the level. So you could identify an objective to monitor vacancy of certain properties, or there's definitely ways you could, word an objective or a recommendation to help identify those specific instances where it's more necessary to be proactive.
There's not much you can do is all you're saying.
Personally, I that's correct.
Without a staff attorney specializing in real estate, right?
No, even so, your choices are you can eminent domain it. You can keep giving them code violations, but if they're up to code, you could do nothing. And as long as they're paying their taxes, you can't do anything.
Correct. I mean, yeah, in general, yes.
Private property.
Yeah.
So eminent domain is really
Okay.
your key. You could take it, but you'd be in court for a while and you'd rack up a lot of, because we're so small and our budget's like 11 million in operating budget. We just don't have that capacity.
Yeah, and you get into a world of hurt too, because if you look at, that's just a visible space. President Rozak brought up we could use more office, but we also have a ton of vacant office, right? I mean, it just sits vacant if you look at our commercial real estate here. So
It's so outdated.
it's more of an effort to just attract more people here and tell them how great it is here.
Or update the space.
Okay,
You can white wall it.
Can I shift gears back a couple chapters perhaps, or just a general question? What is the intergovernmental participation in this? I know President Rozak mentioned it a while ago, maybe an hour or however long ago it was. But when talking about affordability, it's my understanding it's not traditionally been the village board that has increased taxes. It's more the school board. So, what level of participation do they have in this plan, in this, the comprehensive plan?
So
Good.
Now that I just grabbed the third rail of Shorewood politics.
Well, the next element is intergovernmental relations, and that's really where you would outline and discuss those things with the other entities. But no matter what we do, we are separate government bodies. There's nothing we can do. We can talk, we can get along, we can suggest, but ultimately we were created separately. And so the next chapter, I think, Bart, correct me if I'm wrong, but is where you outline some of the things your goals in intergovernmental relations of, let's have, when I went to the chief exec workshop last year, I asked that specific question. How do you guys sit down with your school boards because of the just for taxing entities? And, they send out joint letters in the tax bills. There are things that you can, brainstorm about of what we can recommend intergovernmentally to do in the future to make it more collaborative and more understanding to the community. But again, all entities have to agree. But I think that's a fabulous element to focus on, because we don't do very well, even sharing services with the city of Milwaukee. We just don't do very well with intergovernmental relations at the moment.
I mean, it just strikes me as odd that we have a long conversation about affordability and, you know, and seniors who no longer have mortgages, but their costs continue to go up.
Yep.
You know, it strikes me as sort of lunacy, frankly, that we have these conversations, but then the other taxing entity in the village, you know, would do something like a 4% increase every year. I mean,
Correct.
how does
And I
that
mean-
work out? I mean, how does,
Until
eventually we're
the
going to lose.
then it's called
those
education.
mortgages.
And what I was told by the other mayors and village presidents is it's all education to your residency, because until the residents understand that, they still will look to the village. And again, we can only do so much, but it is your electorate that needs to be educated so they can. That's who the electric protest, the electric, like the people elect. But if they don't know that what the school board does, what we do, who taxes who, then we're failing them because they're not educated enough.
Yeah, that's why it'd be good to.
And I believe that meeting started at 7. That school board meeting was tonight at 7 o'clock, where they have the annual meeting to approve the budget.
Oh, I'm asking because I got a text message
Yeah.
about what it was, and it's a 3.9% increase.
My
Yep.
God.
Every year.
Right, now, I thought it was
And then we did a $65 million referendum last year.
I mean, it was a
And-
recommended 1.9.
274,000 every year more. Also,
And if you look at, the reason why I brought up the mill rate earlier, Bart, is to compare these two. If you look up,
and the assessments went up.
as far as Wisconsin goes, you know, Shorewood is 27th for mill rate in the state for the village, but it's 9th for the school district. And Whitefish Bay, for instance, we're 9 for school district. Whitefish Bay, our neighbor, is 172nd in the state. So, you know, as we're comparing all this economic development, the housing, the opportunity, the affordability, it would be a good point to put these contrasts in there and
We
educate us.
absolutely have to educate the electorate, and this is exactly where you do it. So Eric, Commissioner Kudo, and Commissioner Dan, you're on spot, because if we're just catching on to that, you got to educate the electorate. It's just not right for them not to understand it.
So when you say that this is the place to do it, you know, what does that look like? What is
So we have an intergovernmental, or in the economic development. So we have 2 different chapters, and here we're talking about economic development. Wherever we're going to talk about taxes or affordability, somewhere it needs to be very clear that you know, we can only do so much as a village. We absolutely, an intergovernmental relation chapter. Here's why it's so important, and spell it out that, you know, Milwaukee County keeps their tax rate. They're dying and laying off people left and right because of the pension scandal still, and they keep their tax rate under 2% every year. So, you know, we all know that you need to raise taxes because things go up, expenses go up, but you got to be responsible. And so the electorate needs to know, how come the taxes keep going up, and how can they stop it?
Yes.
It's not us.
okay.
Section 6.8 hopefully will have more tax information in terms of the entities and et cetera, and the mill rate analysis. I know the Wisconsin Policy Forum has done a lot of work on that we can, you know, reference and incorporate. And then yes, intergovernmental chapter will have a framework of who we currently work with and how we can perhaps improve those relationships, or what things we can do. Once again, that's a Vanderwall-led chapter.
And why it's important.
Yeah. So hopefully in September, we'll have more information specifically on that component, because the board and the plan commission did recommend that as one of the, you know, the more important things to include.
I look forward to that conversation.
Okay, sounds good. So just continuing on here, and once again, jump in as you feel need be. So 6.6 talks about our current programs. Historically, that has been TIF, grants, loans, and block grant. Less on the block grant side of things. We're more just eligible, but we haven't really qualified for a lot of big programs with them. So it's Our TIF redevelopments, our facade grants, and our business loans. The grants are currently all expended, so there's no money in that fund anymore. And then the loans are frozen once again for reevaluation. There just wasn't a lot of participation in the program, so the CDA wants to identify how to reestablish that. So they'll be referencing the goals of this chapter, ultimately, hopefully to rebuild that program, or or end it, I suppose, if it's not necessary. But so there is.
I'm sorry, Bart.
Yep.
I know that it's the CDA who really drives the TIF activity, but we're saying in here how it allows the municipality to fund infrastructure and other improvements and so on. And we've used ours to kind of go beyond that, increasing the return on investment to make a potential development more attractive to a developer, so they don't. And I'm quoting the CDA's former financial advisor, don't take their capital and go elsewhere. That was the case of the Oaks development. The criteria was the but for. If we don't give the TIF money, then this development won't happen. And I'm just wondering whether we could put in place any other criteria, like whether a development must fit into the surrounding properties, not cause any consequential traffic or parking issues, or is that kind of out of the Plan Commission's hands and really left with the CDA to manage?
Let me address that. The CDA is working on a TIF policy. And according to Rebecca, I talked with her, she thinks it's going to be done within 30 to 60 days. Done, okay. Completely and adopted. So hopefully that will jive into this, exactly what you're saying. And just to be clear, there are two different types of tax increment financing districts. No one ever understands this. One is village or municipal city initiated. Those are usually infrastructure. So like taking down a freeway, the Park East Freeway, building a river walk, building a park, but utilizing the taxes from an adjacent new development. And then the other is gap financing, which is developer initiated. So It's not, so they come to us and they ask us, and then we do a review of their pro forma. So it's very okay to address one or the other, meaning if you support using TIF to do, important infrastructure projects, I would address it here.
Okay. Oh, and it kind of caught my eye with the line that said, we're talking about the but for, that this requirement is important to ensure TIF assists development projects needing help, but that is not a gift of tax dollars to private developers or property owners. And I know that there's a lot of different opinion about that. So based on past use in Shorewood. So I wasn't sure, if the CDA is going to update their policy, then perhaps we can incorporate whatever they decide in the next or final version of the comprehensive plan.
Yep, strategic planning identified that as one of the next steps. And so we're talking about TID extension first, and then TIF policy and application process second. So I know that Rebecca has reached out to our current financial advisor on some draft kind of things. So we will definitely be working on that this fall. But it will still incorporate itself in here, definitely, once I know more about it.
Okay, and I had one last question on this section. The facade grant funds that were used for the COVID emergency fund grants, does the board plan to replenish the facade fund bucket, or is that program going to be ended or just furloughed for now?
I know that we were directed not to close it, because once you close a program, it's hard to reestablish it. So essentially it's still available without funding. I have not heard any conversation of replenishing that. From
the board, but the CDA has their own money. So they could replenish it utilizing the loan program. They could replenish it utilizing their $500,000 that they have left in administrative pot. So there's money there. It's just have they voted to replenish it.
So yeah, I think reallocating existing funds is more likely than getting new funds.
Okay. So if they make a decision to do that before the final draft is voted on by the board, we could include that. Otherwise, we'll just leave it the way it is.
We could.
It won't it won't be voted on by the board. It would be CDA money.
That's what I meant. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't think that will happen before January. So, but if it does, either way, we'll keep an eye on it.
Okay, thank you.
Then I also did include labor force and employment analysis. As we mentioned, we are, you know, reliant on other communities for most of our employment. Most of our residents work in white collar occupations at proportions higher than both the county and metro areas. Not surprisingly, I'm sure. We do have a low employment base with service sector predominance, as President Rosick mentioned, the metro market being one of our largest employers. Our residents do have a high educational attainment, but once again, they usually take that elsewhere to work. Our income is higher than the county and region, but comparable within the North Shore. So that kind of speaks to our purchasing power in terms of local retail or business and food establishments. We did witness an increase in poverty. I know that Vanderwall is trying to parse out that statistic a little closer, but the presumption is, you know, that is likely related to renters and students, but why it went up, I still don't know the answer to that. So that's a to be continued kind of conversation. So there is a section on labor force and employment.
I think it's probably because we're getting older.
Quite possible as well, right? Less,
I think there's more elderly.
More people retired with less incomes.
I just had a quick question. Right above the table, 6.x for occupations, you talk about the county, MSA, and state. What does the MSA refer to? I didn't see it spelled out.
Metropolitan Statistical Area. It's a central term, so I can clarify that. So it's probably
Okay.
like a 4-county region is my assumption. I could maybe find a map and include it so it's clear.
Okay. Because on the table it says Milwaukee Metro, so I wasn't quite sure if you meant MMA or something. And
yep, I probably interchangeably use so I'll make sure that it's consistent.
okay, thanks.
Art, is there any way on that medium household income chart for us to look at income for homeowners versus renters? And the reason I wondered, or by age, because that might be helpful to know if the village is considering, you know, home improvement loan programs or grant programs or senior housing development. You know, just having, even if we don't include it in this comprehensive plan, it would be good to know when you're planning those kind of programs.
I can definitely try. So that would be household income by 10 years, how they refer to that. So like if there's a chart for that, or if I can pull data, I can by tenure or by age. Sometimes they're not spelled out, but I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, renters versus homeowners and by age.
And looking on here, it doesn't seem like, by the way, back to that poverty thing, that retired people are calculated in the poverty status thing. So it's just on income. So if you're not if you've saved, you don't have a ton of income anymore, you can still be in the poverty level of plenty of money.
So.
It's a good point. It could be increasing age leads to poverty as well. So I'll talk to Vanderwall about what they found on that one.
I had a question on this section. Is there any way to know how many people work out of their homes?
There is.
Lots right now.
The census does.
Everybody.
They do
Other than
estimate
this
it.
year.
They do estimate it, so I think I can find that. I'm blanking on. It came past my thought process, and I'm not sure why I didn't include it. So I will reconfirm.
I know why.
Did or didn't.
It's hard. When I asked that question, it was really hard because people don't like to report they work from their homes, because then they have to pay taxes on their property, on their like computers, and so a lot of people won't report that. So the numbers are lower than they would be.
I think they might report it also in the commute time. So in the larger census question, you report how far your commute is to work, and I think one of them is you would home. So it might be in a different location as well. I will definitely look into that, because it does come up from the Plan Commission's perspective quite a bit. CDA also talked about it recently. So with white collar occupations, that you can do that from home in COVID times specifically, you know, it is good to know what the lay of the land is, so to say. So I'll look into that.
And would that change your assessment on your residential real estate?
Your personal property. There's a personal property tax, correct?
I would have to consult the assessor on that. I am not familiar if it was or not.
That's what.
And I
that's
just
what
have one more
Mark said.
assessment related question. So the building, the Northwoods building, let's say it's half full of Northwoods and half empty. The assessed value on that is the same, correct? It's not like it's like an empty house is taxed the same as a full house, right?
So once again, I would defer to the assessor. I know there's different ways to assess buildings. Sometimes they do assess them based on operating income. I don't believe that we do that here as a standard practice. I think that we do it more on comparable sales. So whether it's vacant or full, I don't think that should make a difference, but I would have to defer to the assessor on the actual answer. Because I know in instances they do use income as a factor.
A basis. Okay, thank you.
So yeah, on that point, 6.8, I'm looking for more information on assessment and real estate and taxes, and I think that has come up as an important conversation tonight. So just need to get that information in there. I'll definitely include it in the revision, and maybe I'll send it out specifically when I have it, just so that you have a chance to review it first before you see it in the final draft form. And then we are required by the state to list any known environmental contamination, and the DNR does have a website that maintains that listing, and we've got 2 known leaking underground storage tanks and 2 environmental remediation properties. So just for documentation's sake, we have those listed.
What about our DPW site?
It
It states in the report.
didn't come in the list, but I'm, between that and the gas stations, I'm sure, there's contamination of some level. The old dry cleaners obviously always come up. But
So if Queensway is cleaned up now, right? Is that one of these?
yep, it's
Is
being monitored still.
4,300
So
open?
it's still technically open because it's being monitored, I think, for a certain number of months. That is one of them, I believe, in there. Yeah, correct.
Thank you.
So with that, this is my final slide for the evening, but I'm looking forward to more conversation. The one and only goal that we had in economic development was to maintain and improve private property and public infrastructure to maximize assessed value of real estate. I feel like that is rather incomplete in relation to everything else we've discussed in this chapter. So I'm once going to be looking towards more feedback from you guys on your priorities of the potential concepts that I've outlined. I feel like between strategic planning and the data in here, I think we can make a more sensible, summarization of how the village wishes to proceed in the next 20 years. So if you have any thoughts now, once again, feel free to offer them. Otherwise, I will redo a poll to you guys with these concepts, but there's quite a bit listed here. So I just feel like the current plan is kind of shortchanged on economic development concepts.
It's kind of hard to think about what's going to happen 20 years and we just don't know what life is going to be like, after this year.
In 6 months, right?
Right. So, I mean, I only had 2 thoughts on this list. One was, explore ways to build daytime population. I thought, well, the whole COVID, stay home, kids at home during the day, school from home, that provides some temporary help, but who knows what's going to next year. And then the blight removal, including non-conforming uses and structures. I would like to have that non-conforming uses and structures defined, because I thought if that's, based on the current code, buildings are supposed to be 2-story, but some of our most charming buildings in the village, thinking of the North Shore Boulangerie and the City Market, are 1-story buildings. So I don't like that term. They're non-conforming. They're considered blight or whatever. So I think we need to define what that really means.
Well, they are non-conforming. They're just maybe not blight.
Right. I just don't want us to, as we mentioned earlier, get rid of the village character in our effort for, newer, denser, higher tax base, whatever it might be.
I'm that came from something else. I'm trying to think of where it came from, but maybe, rewording or splitting those 2 concepts out.
Yeah.
Blight is one thing, non-conforming uses might be another thing. So
right.
I'll try to remember where that came from.
Yeah, I mean, non-conforming uses, you know, you could think, well, it's historical because zoning codes get updated through time, and, you know, some buildings, they're just not going to fit, just like our old houses. And one thing we didn't have in here, and maybe this isn't the place that the Plan Commission has talked about before, was just as we did with the fire station, you know, some sort of protection for historic properties, whether that's municipal or commercial buildings or, you know, residential buildings. I know we put it on our priorities list, but I just didn't really see that here, unless I missed it.
Yep, nope, good point. I definitely should be. I know the third thing talks about historic tax credits to promote preservation, so the concept is there, but maybe on a broader scale, it could be, you know, less
Even
specific.
under housing. I forgot to mention.
Yep.
Historic preservation and housing as well.
Yep,
Yeah.
it should be in both.
Yeah, both.
So, I'm sorry if Barb is done.
I am done, thank you.
So my question is, let's say, I mean, I generally oppose anything taller than 4 stories in the village, but we do have the block with the fountain blue, and I think it's the old North Shore Bank building. And then there's the building that Ascension used to be in, Columbia St. Mary's, you know, it's like only 2 floors. So there is a core of very tall buildings in that one area. Is this where is it going to be land use or issues and opportunities where we would say, if we decide to embrace affordable housing in a large scale project, what are the locations that we would be willing to say this is a spot? So in my view, that would be one spot, that Ascension building, because it's already got tall buildings around it. You would not really notice another tall building there. Another thing to think about, I think, is, you know, what the city of Milwaukee has done with their libraries. I know the library right now is doing a 2040 plan for reconstruction or renovation. Is this a time where we would say, what about we consider in the future, if we want to really add housing? I think they have the entrance for the housing is on one side of the building, and the entrance for the library is on a different floor or a different side. But then you're using the space twice, right? Is this where we go at that? Is that in land use or?
Yes.
So the height question would be in land use for sure. And there's a chapter on community facilities where the library and other entities like that are discussed. So it could also pop itself up in there in terms of how we look at those facilities and positioning them towards the future. Land use for sure on the height issue though.
Right. And just so people understand, the land use map, so is very important. That's why the consultants are doing it. But if we decide we want to keep Shorewood affordable, and we decide we want to recommend height somewhere because we need more units, and we decide it happens to be in the quadrant where the North Shore Bank is, whichever one you're talking about, Commissioner Stoke-Brin.
Oakland and Capitol. Oakland and Capitol.
Oakland Capitol. So say that. Then you may designate that quadrant. We may recommend on our land use map, just say that is 4 to 7 stories or something like that. That will guide your zoning code. So your zoning code needs to be consistent with your comp plan. And your comp plan land use map is the most important thing of the whole plan, in my opinion, because that is
I would agree.
Right? That guides your zoning code. And so really that's what we'll focus on when the consultants get us that chapter, but you're dead on what needs to go where.
This question is either President Rozak or Bart. So a little further east of there, we have some other taller apartment buildings. You know, there's one that's kind of kitty corner from St. Robert's. It has a parking lot right on the corner. You know, normally if the zoning code says 4-story maximum, Are those taller buildings kind of grandfathered in as far as their height? So say a developer comes in and wants to
No.
replace, they're not?
So Bart, correct me if I'm wrong, they're unconforming uses. And so they can stay, they can, redevelop a little bit, but if you tear those things down, the zoning stands. Is that correct, Bart?
Correct. I believe the code actually says that you can't improve it more than 50%
50%,
assessed
right.
value. So, so they can renovate it to a certain level as a non-conforming use, but they can't do a full, gut job necessarily without having the zoning reestablished. And then yes, if they were to remove that non-conforming structure, it would need to be built back within the conformity of the zoning code. So if it's only there for 4 stories, they took it down, they can only rebuild 4 stories.
Okay.
So Bart, do you want us to send you recommendations again for this economic development, also for the future potential concepts for discussion?
Yeah, feel free to send me comments on any of the chapters specifically, but I also will then send a poll to prioritize these concepts. Like I said, I'll probably do it on a week-by-week basis so I don't overwhelm myself or yourself with them. But yeah, anything specific to any chapter, I'm welcome at any time. The CDA will be reviewing this in 2 weeks, so if I get it before then, I could have a chance to update it before then. So if you're able to do that, if you got your thoughts right now, feel free to send them as soon as you can.
And so what's our next meeting?
So yeah, our next meeting, are we okay to move on to that, or is that?
I don't have I had to switch to my phone, so could someone tell me the next agenda item?
So if
no, 7 is future agenda items and 8 is discuss next meeting.
Okay, let's just go ahead and do future agenda items first. Does anyone have a future agenda item? I did, and I can't remember what it is, so I'll wait till next time. And now we can move on to the last item, which is next date.
Oh, wait, one under future agenda items, just a quick, is there anything we should be doing with the census, Bart? I mean, I know that got cut a month short as far as people in the field.
Nothing. So our County, she has sent an update this past week that we actually are, because now they're doing door-to-door counts. I don't know if you haven't even seen them in the community, that our numbers have slightly ticked back up. So I can send out that to you guys. I got it yesterday, I think, the new number. So I think we're either in line or above our 2010 response rate. So that's a good thing. But to Barbara's point, we did receive notice that the census will be ending at the end of September as opposed to October. So final push for anyone to respond. We're looking more so at hard to count communities, particularly renters in Shorewood. So if you have any thoughts on that, feel free to act on them or let me know and I can do that. We will be publishing more, social media posts to kind of get the final push out on that. So I don't think there's anything specific, but always a good thought.
Are we beating Minnesota yet? They were ahead of us.
Unfortunately, I don't think that we are. So
oh, darn.
Work to be done.
Is that all? Okay, thank you. Can we move on to meeting date?
Yes, so our next scheduled date would be September 22nd, I believe. So that's our regular meeting. I don't have anything, and Crystal can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we have any applications on file for conditional uses or anything. So
no.
We would be using the meeting once again to go over first village-led chapters and then Vanderwall-led chapters. So there's 2 more from me and 3 from them. I don't think we can get through 5 in one meeting, if I'm quite honest with you. So, if we want to maintain our current schedule, I would be looking for a second meeting in either late September, or early October. We can try all 5 in one meeting and just quit.
No.
Sure. I appreciate that. I appreciate that perspective. So the next meeting would be September 22nd, and then we would need to, I'm guessing, need to schedule a meeting, like I said, late September, early October. I know there's a lot of budget discussions coming on with the village board, so there's a lot of conflicts there.
Well, can we do earlier than September 20? Can we do like the week before the 22nd, and then the last week in September?
I would.
Is that too early?
Will not be ready. I'll be honest.
Okay.
I will not be ready with that. So.
I'll be out of town prior to that.
I know
Okay.
Vandewall told me they'd be available September 29th if we wanted to go back-to-back weeks. They said that would be available to them.
I'm fine with that. Anybody else?
Yeah, no, it works for me. Let's just
I can do it.
keep going on this.
September 22 and September 29th, 2 Tuesdays, right? I can do
Yep,
that.
that would work. That would work with me and with Vandewall. So
It works for me.
let's plan on that then. And so I'll have 2 more chapters, and then they'll bring the 3 on the September 29th.
Okay. One thing I forgot to ask about future agenda items, it came up during board, something where you recommended that it be handled at the staff level. Wasn't it like fences in the right of way, or I can't remember what it was, but
It was special privileges. Trustee Carpenter brought up,
yes.
I think we had 3 of them on an agenda recently. And it's in my to-do list queue of rewriting that section of the code to perhaps allow staff administrative approval of minor privileges. That's how we.
Okay. And will it come to us? Will it come to Plan Commission?
It typically would not come to, like, you're talking about the ordinance update?
Yeah. Yep.
I think that typically would just go to the village board. I don't think it involves
Okay.
the land use or zoning elements. So it would go to the board for maybe the community business relations subcommittee or something of that nature, but I don't think the plan commission would see it first.
Well, we are talking about not letting, like, just having staff approve some special uses, additional permits.
No, special privilege permit. So it's when someone like installs a retaining wall within the public right of way.
Uh-huh.
Or lesser, sometimes it's just landscaping. A lot of those go to the village board. The discussion would be that if there's certain things that, as long as DPW essentially approves that it's not interfering with their maintenance of the right of way, that we could approve subject to the conditions that it must be replaced if, whatever. Right now, they all go to the village board and they kind of clog up the consent. So I would recommend 2 levels, a level that must go to the board for approval, and then a level that the board is comfortable that, between my department and DPW, that we confirm that there's no issues with it being there. So that's the concept. So
okay.
That is not on the top of my to-do list, but it's on there somewhere.
Okay, thank you. That was all I had. So does anybody else have anything, I think, except a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Stokebrand, a second by Commissioner Kudo. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Bart.
guys.
Okay.
Thanks, Bart.
Thanks, everyone. Good conversation.
Good
Yeah.
night.
See you next
Good night.
time.
Bye.